I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Secretary Burgess, are there any changes to the final agenda?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. There are no changes to the agenda. And if I could just kindly remind everyone when they're making comments, and they could just speak closely into the microphone so that's picked up by the webcast. Thank you.
Was that directed at certain commissioners as well, Secretary?
Yes, please. Make sure your green lights are on, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome and acknowledge and appreciate our new colleague, Commissioner Tracy Edwards, to my left, to your right. Welcome. Thank you for serving with us.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to being here, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you and serving the public. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Terrific. So with that, let's get down to business. The first item for discussion is item 201, case 19M0265, which is in the matter of a program to encourage clean energy in Westchester County, presented by Ted Kennedy, Assistant Counsel. Peggy Neville, Deputy Director for Clean Energy, is available for questions. Ted, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Item 201 is a draft order establishing a Westchester County Consumer Awareness Program consistent with the requirements of Public Service Law Section 74A. PSL 74A was enacted as part of the 2019 State Budget Bill. PSL 74A requires the Public Service Commission to, within 90 days of April 1st, 2019, and in consultation with the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, establish a program to encourage the installation of renewable energy resources and energy efficiencies in the County of Westchester. PSL 74A was passed in response to the moratorium on new firm service connections for natural gas in parts of Westchester County that was announced by the Consolidated Edison Company of New York, Con Edison, on January 17, 2019. Also in relation to the moratorium, the Department and NYSERDA announced the Westchester Clean Energy Action Plan, which I'll call the Action Plan, on March 14, 2019. The Action Plan includes activities by NYSERDA, Con Edison, and the New York Power Authority, in collaboration with the Commission and the Department, Westchester County, and other stakeholders, to offer support to businesses and residents in the area of Westchester County, the areas of Westchester County affected by the moratorium. Specifically, the action plan includes support for the purchase, installation, and development of alternative heating and cooling systems, such as heat pumps, and other energy efficiency measures by customers unable to enroll in gas service due to the moratorium, as well as for gas energy efficiency and clean heating and cooling for existing customers in the area to reduce gas demand. To support Commission action on PSL 74A, a notice was issued requesting that NYSERDA file a description of the proposed consumer awareness campaign and Sustainable and Clean Energy Workshop Program, including a description of including a description of coordination with Con Edison and Westchester County. NYSERDA filed the proposed Westchester County Consumer Awareness Program plan on May 24th of this year. The proposed awareness program was developed with input from and will be implemented in concert with Westchester County and Con Edison, as well as NYPA. Following baseline research to determine current awareness and need with market segmentation informed by that research, NYSERDA proposes to conduct targeted marketing as well as one-on-one engagement and workshops to educate individuals regarding options available to reduce their energy use and carbon footprint and to heat and cool their spaces without the use of fossil fuels. NYSERDA explains that it will work with trade associations and professional organizations, as well as Westchester County, local municipal governments, industrial development authorities, Con Edison, NYPA, and the Hudson Valley Regional Economic Development Council to schedule and promote workshops regarding clean energy and energy efficiency for existing and new construction buildings. NYSERDA explains that the effectiveness of the program will be measured through tracking media performance, website traffic and activity, comparison of awareness and implementation to baseline studies, and by monitoring the effectiveness of the action plan programs that the awareness program supports. Consistent with the requirements of PSL 74A, 2 public statement hearings were held in the city of White Plains. In addition, written comments were filed. The commenters universally supported the awareness program as an important tool to enhance the effectiveness of the action plan. Several commenters made recommendations on how to maximize the success of the awareness program and the action plan. In particular, Assemblymember Amy Paulin, Westchester County Executive George Latimer, and White Plains Mayor Thomas Roach stated that NYSERDA should ensure that the information on and process for taking advantage of programs should be as streamlined as possible and should work with local governments and local officials to fully inform communities of their options. Earth Justice, the Pace Energy and Climate Center, the Association for Energy Affordability, and E for the Future encourage the full inclusion of low and moderate income individuals, including through affordable housing providers and collaboration with weatherization contractors. Both the Utility Intervention Unit and Bob Wyman filed comments stating that the awareness program should include detailed and accurate information about the benefits, costs, and decisions associated with the installation of heat pumps, as well as education on how to operate heat pumps to ensure maximum comfort and efficiency. The draft order finds that the awareness program proposed by NYSERDA complies with PSL 74A and is an effective means of educating customers on both how their usage impacts the system and on what programs and options are available to manage their usage. New York's energy goals will only be achieved through widespread participation in the increasingly distributed, efficient, and clean system envisioned by the Reforming the Energy Vision Initiative. Such participation must be driven by collaboration between the state, utilities, local governments, community organizers, developers, and citizens. The awareness program will advance such collaboration and participation. Therefore, the draft order approves and establishes the awareness program and directs its implementation by NYSERDA in collaboration with Con Edison and Westchester County. In implementing the program, NYSERDA should take the comments into account and ensure that it addresses the recommendations by stakeholders. That concludes my presentation, and Peggy, Neville, and I are available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. This is a narrow item, responding specifically as instructed by statute. And it would approve a plan for outreach and awareness, triggered, of course, by the moratorium in Con Ed's Westchester territory. It's a useful and inclusive plan, and one that is very nicely coordinated among program administrators and also coordinated with local government and the New York Power Authority. It's one specific aspect of a larger issue, but it's a very good aspect. I will support this item. Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. I actually don't see it as a narrowly tailored to the legislation. And I have a number of different thoughts and comments on this item. And I do think it's important for us to go through it because while I am very cognizant of the issues, I'm very pleased to see the input from the stakeholders. I'm also very aware of the concerns. What I am concerned about is that it is our approach and our implementation of the legislation is not actually with the full record and is actually trying to give lip service to legislation in a way that is not taking into account a more comprehensive alignment of all of the information that is to come and that we need to have, and a fuller accounting of the history that got us here. And I think it is foolhardy for us to go forward without a recognition of that and without doing a deeper dive. All we really would be doing is doing more customer confusion and seeming to indicate that all in Westchester was now okay because we have now adopted an awareness plan. And in fact, we still need to do much more deeper analysis, and we are awaiting a report that was submitted July 1st, and an analysis of that as well as other information is important. So let's take a deeper dive into what this order is and how it goes askew from the legislation. So looking at, taking a step back, the legislation came about from the moratorium and came about from the action plan. And the action plan was an announcement that pulled together about 7 different things. Some of those plans, some of those bullets from the action plan were adoptions of some action items that the commission had done. Not all of them were tied directly to the commission, and not all of those pieces of the action plan actually were directly connected to Westchester per se. And so when we look at some of that and pulling it together, we have to actually look at what actually the commission itself is now having before us. So if you can take a moment to walk through that action plan and what it is that the commission is has done, and then what is outside of the commission, that would be helpful. And to the extent that we also know from the dollar figure, how much of the dollar figure has been expended, and so far from that.
Sure, so I can do that. I can give you the total dollar figure. I don't know if we have information at this time on how much has been expended so far. We're fairly early in these programs, so my guess would be it would be a small percentage, but I can't give you any specific numbers on that, but I can give you what the total figure was. So the first component listed is a $165 million Con Edison program supporting heat pumps and energy efficiency, and that was approved by the Commission in a February 7th, 2019 order as part of Con Ed's proposal regarding non-pipeline solutions. The term smart solutions is also used for that. The next component was $28 million from a NYSERDA program focused on new construction incentives and services for new customers, including low to moderate income residential development. And this was in particular focused at customers who were currently in development and who would have sought to have gas service but were unable to get it because of the moratorium, and focused on providing incentives for heat pumps and also for other gas efficiency to those customers. The next component was a $25 million NYSERDA program to implement energy efficiency measures for existing customers to reduce overall demand constraints. So those 2 NYSERDA programs were both already in action as part of the Clean Energy Fund, which was approved. The Clean Energy Fund as a whole was approved by the Commission back in 2016, January 2016. And there were investment plans that have been filed and approved by staff that had components related to that, and in particular that NYSERDA is targeting at gas-constrained areas. Right now that would be the relevant areas of Westchester for some of it. Other gas-constrained areas of the state, as any further constraints happen, would also be eligible. Let's see. There's a separate bullet which lists additional NYSERDA incentives for clean heating and cooling systems. I believe that's also part of the $25 million. It's not a separate funding pool. There's another bullet that lists $32 million in financing services provided by the New York Power Authority for its Westchester customers to retrofit heating systems with clean energy alternatives, and that's money from the New York Power Authority. It's not money that's from any commission program or is under the authority of the commission. That's under NYPA's jurisdiction and authority. And the next 2 bullets relate to the program that's before the commission now, the Consumer Awareness Campaign, and the Sustainable and Clean Energy Workshops led by NYSERDA. And NYSERDA reports that the funding for that is expected to be a little bit less than $1 million per year, and that their proposal is for the program to be in effect for approximately 3 years, with potential consideration of extension or expansion based on progress, need, effectiveness, and also whether it needs to be expanded to other areas based on gas constraints.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And all of that, I think, from my perspective, so we have the January 17th, 2019 moratorium is announced by Con Ed. Then we have the February decision by the commission. We have all of these other things already in place. We have then a March 14th, 2019 action plan announced but not voted on by the commission. It's announced and put out there. Then we have a legislation, Section 74A, Public Service Law, Section 74A, adopted into law. And then we have a commission session, and we don't mention it or do anything with that. But on April 25th, 2019, a notice is issued by the Secretary identifying and asking for now NYSERDA to file an awareness plan and for comments to be received on that. And then that is taken into consideration, and then that is what is here before us today, and a new case filing. In the meantime, we also have ongoing cases in the matters as it relates to the moratorium, as it relates to non-pipes, as it relates to the Con Ed rate case, as it relates to the energy efficiency order, which also deals and has a lot of activity pretty heavily relating to many things, but in particular heat pump issues and activities, and I think would say robust comments on that issue, and lots of back and forth. We also have updates from staff and approvals that are coming in from NYSERDA, seeking approvals on the investment plans that are aligned back to the 2016 CF order, and staff is approving them as appropriate, aligned with the 2016 order, to match up the funding streams that are going in place, not necessarily coming for approval again to the commission, but from since 2016, there have been many different updates and approvals that come in and get approved, and changes made to reflect that will come in and don't necessarily come before the commission for evaluation or approval, because it's given to the staff to do so. So I point that out because we're now in a situation where this change in the law is now before us to implement. So the law says within 90 days of the effective date of this section, the Commission shall, in consultation with NYSERDA, after a hearing held on notice, established by order, rules, and regulations, a program to encourage the installation of renewable energy resources and energy efficiencies in the County of Westchester. Now, for the purposes of this section, renewable energy resources and energy efficiency shall have the same meaning as defined by the Commission, consistent with the most recent state energy plan, pursuant to Article 6 of the Energy Law. And for those of you who are wondering, yes, renewable energy resources and energy efficiency are defined in the 2015 State Energy Plan appendices. So you can look for those definitions there. And we are going with the 2015 State Energy Plan because it hasn't been updated according to the law since it would have been 2019 if we're going with 2015 most recent one. So in any event, 2015 State Energy Plan that we'd be looking at for purposes of this and those definitions. When I look to this, my concern is that the order seems to go much more beyond just having a program set up that encourages the installation of renewable energy resources and energy efficiencies in the county of Westchester. What do I mean by that? So the order says, one, it gives more funding than the $250 million. It goes for this section of the law, which had it was in the budget. It had no funding attached to it. It was codifying the action plan, which we're not being asked to adopt or vote on. We're being asked to vote on the awareness plan. This law doesn't ask us to set up an awareness program, but we came up with, through the notice of the secretary, not the commission, the awareness program. But in any event, the awareness program that was filed by NYSERDA is for 3 years and has a budget of $920,000 for annually. That's what the order is saying. So this is effective for 1 year. Why do we go beyond the effective date of this?
So to clarify, the effective date is 1 year because it's part of the budget, which has a 1 year effective period. But the legislation doesn't actually state that it should be a 1 year program. In theory, it could be a 2-month program or a 5-year program. It just requires it to be authorized on a certain date during that year. And so essentially the reason for it to be a multi-year program is to provide some certainty of term and to essentially, between the development of the program and actually implementing it, it was determined to be appropriate to have it be a multi-year program to provide the continuous messaging to the area over that period.
All right. So I would agree that it would look, from a certainty perspective, maybe a 3-year program, maybe a 5-year program, maybe a 10-year program would work. Who determines whether the legislature, which we apparently narrowly tailored to meet the specifications, the legislature decided in the budget this 1-year program for Westchester to meet the demands of this action plan, was codifying it, was appropriate for 1 year. They didn't do it outside of the budget. There was no funding attached to it. They said 1 year. So they didn't say outside of the budget we're going to have legislation that goes beyond that. It's just for Westchester. And we've set up now an order that is potentially, because there's language that says this may be a statewide program, and we're going to do this potential statewide program for 3 years. Why are we doing this now when we don't have the full record? We don't even have information on whether the action plan is being effective. We don't have because remember, when the announcement came on the action plan and the press release came on the action plan, it also noticed at that time that there was an independent review from DPS on the July 1st report that was to come, that was going to give information on what was going on with gas supply. So we don't have that information. We don't have that analysis. We also talked about the fact that the report yet was not there because we were looking to see about aligning it with pending legislation as well. So why would we move forward on further beyond this legislation on information that we don't yet have on whether or not it's appropriate when we don't have more information? Why not just say we are codifying this further for here, we're doing what we need to do for this legislation, but we are waiting for more information to see what else we need to do when the report comes in, when we have other information, when we see what's going on with the action plan, when we look at what's happening in the other proceedings, when we look at the upcoming energy efficiency proceeding, those are the right places to look at that information. I'm just trying to understand the disconnect.
Yeah, so I mean, the first component of the awareness program is essentially a baseline study to determine what current levels of awareness are of these various options, and also what current levels of deployment are. So I think to have any kind of a short period would really sort of hamstring the potential of the awareness program, in that the study would probably end up taking up a significant portion of that year. It wouldn't even be a full year, since the legislation lasts a year, so it would be only in April if we just went through the expiry point of the legislation, so 6 or 9 months or so. So that really wouldn't allow NYSERDA or their partners the time to set up advertising programs, workshop programs, outreach, and to also presumably enter into the sorts of multi-year contracts that can be cost effective and effective in terms of actual outreach. So I think it really is, since we're setting up this program in compliance with the legislation, we want to ensure it's set up in a way that it will actually be an effective program. And I think having a period of multi-year certainty is the most, or staff proposes that having a period of multi-year certainty is the best way to do that.
Okay, thank you. If it was NYSERDA's money and not ratepayer money, I wouldn't have an issue. But it's ratepayer money, and that's where I have an issue. My concern is that we have a lot of studies. We're still waiting on the renewable energy study, still waiting on a lot of other things. We're still waiting on a report. We're still waiting on analysis. And we don't necessarily have information that is necessarily helping. I don't want to just see us pretending that we are being helpful and saying that we want to avoid customer confusion, and at the same time not actually helping in a way that is giving people choices and opportunity to have the energy that they need while they await further studies and further analysis and further research. People don't need big marketing campaigns, and I just want to make sure that the collaboration that's being done is not wasteful and is actually helpful. I do think that when we look forward, what might be more helpful is, one of the things that I would say is I am very, very, very cognizant of the need to really have quality information out there for people, to really have all the information about the costs and the benefits on all different things in a way that people can make rational choices. But I also don't think that we should just leave it to, go off and go do it. That why wouldn't we say to NYSERDA, if NYSERDA is deemed the right entity, come back to us with your implementation plan, and we will put it out there for comments, and we as the commission will say yes to that. Why would I leave that to the staff to adopt that? It's too important.
So, I do think the awareness program had a reasonable amount of detail on how it would be implemented, certainly not every single detail. But I do think it's something where we believe it's appropriate to send them forward and for them to actually start working on the actual outreach and program, rather than having to go through sort of a second planning process that could really hamper the actual start of studies and also outreach and workshops and advertisements and so on. Could delay that by a further, probably 6 months or so between the process of them actually putting together something additional and then having a comment period and full consideration of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So as I see it, I see that we do have a disconnect. We have a lot of overlap. We have a lot of missing pieces. We have legislation that is targeted to Westchester, but we are not necessarily causing real information to be out there. We have not done a real analysis. We do not have the foundational information. And we are really only picking and choosing. We have gas demand response pilot program. I know we have filings that have come in. We should be focused on a full briefing of the information that we got on that, how that ties in, into what's happening in Westchester. But since we also are looking at taking this in this order statewide, the question does become, so what does that mean when we're talking about this money? What does that mean from a subsidy perspective? Am I to assume that we should see another action plan press release since it didn't come before the commission last time for Westchester? A Lansing action plan press release, a Long Island action plan press release, come up with another. I just want to make sure that we as a commission, as a body, understand the ramifications of this. Because since in this action plan, this pulled out pieces of some of the things that the commission itself did. And I will note for the record that not all of these pieces I had been supportive in. So it really, for me, was not a collaborative action plan. And yet, if I vote yes for this awareness plan, the underlying awareness, the underlying pieces of it are in part adopting the action plan, and yet I will not have oversight on many aspects of it. I will not be able to evaluate the effectiveness of NYPA's energy efficiency pieces. I will not be able to evaluate the effectiveness of many attributes that may be happening that will not have been directly connected to the Commission's funding. So that is of concern to me, because what I care about is the true accountability and safe and reliable service that's happening in real time. And if we're being honest, what drove the action plan was there was a moratorium. So we need to look at what is the root causes of that moratorium, and are we still having concerns with that, and has the action plan alleviated any of those, and are we in a better place, and what is the cost-benefit analysis that we've done from that, and are we working with all of our partners, including the ISO, to look at our reliability. And in this order, there's no mention of reliability. And for those who still want gas, what are their alternatives? Where's their piece of awareness? When I look at some of the pieces in the filings from NYSERDA in their investment portfolios, it also talked about the clean heat program. But when you see the filings and the awareness programs, that the PowerPoints that went out in Westchester, it didn't have a lot on that. It really was really focused on just heat pumps. It did not focus on all renewable energy resources. So I wondered, is it really geared towards that one particular attribute, even though in what the staff approved, it was about the neutrality that was supposed to be there. And yet their own PowerPoints that were there were pushing one particular renewable energy resource. And that concerned me.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say a few points on that is that the NYSERDA as well as Con Edison have full complements of energy efficiency programs, and in NYSERDA's cases beyond that, you mentioned the Clean Heat program, which in the investment plan that you reviewed also included some work related to biomass, as I believe the one you're referring to. So there's no restriction for certainly the work that will happen under the awareness program, working with residents and business owners in any of the affected areas for any programs that are available to them. Just because we are highlighting certain key technologies here, that doesn't mean they're exempted from other technologies that exist in certain open enrollment programs. Excuse me. So I would certainly expect that to be part of any local outreach, which is the one thing that we heard, I think, very strongly through the comment process that I believe the awareness program speaks to is, really working with consumers in the affected areas at their level, whether that be through local workshops, not just, the flashy marketing campaigns that might be less effective, but really trying to, as Ted mentioned, understand kind of base level understandings from consumers about what their options are. And as we, really look forward, because I don't think even in the action plan release, it presents itself as the final solution. It's really just the first step in trying to, for all of us collectively, to understand how we move forward. But that it's both new construction as well as existing buildings, existing gas customers, making them as efficient as possible, and what are, all of the various measures that could be implemented.
Okay, thank you. I think you both answered my questions. I'm still not satisfied. I do appreciate your due diligence. I think, excuse me, I am concerned. I don't think that we should be deciding this without all of the pieces of the pie. I think that we really do need to have other information, and we are trying to limit other information. In some ways, I think that is a disservice and we're not taking into account the significant responsibility of what really led us to the dire circumstances of the moratorium, which I've been speaking about before the moratorium. So it's of concern to me. What I come with is that I do believe that we have an opportunity, and we need to all work together. I am very grateful for the legislators for speaking very loudly about their concerns in Westchester, and I think that we could do better. And this order is not a reflection of what we should be doing to make sure that we are holistically addressing that, and then using that as a model to address the other issues. And we are also forgetting about the other communities who are also needing attention. And if we use this as a model, all we are really doing is Band-Aid approaches, and that is a problem for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Lisi.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that pursuing our clean energy goals requires an informed participation not only by the general public but utilities and businesses and government agencies as well, and that informed participation will be hopefully a byproduct of this awareness plan, and I think the plan will go a long way towards helping us achieve our clean energy goals. I'll be supporting it.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Edwards.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I first want to thank the staff for providing me all of the information over the last couple of weeks on all of the things that are on the regular agenda. I know I asked for a lot of information, and I appreciate you taking the time to provide me the information and answer all my questions. In particular with the Consumer Awareness Program, what I would ask is that we do a little bit more on the consumer side, residential consumer side, because when I received the information in terms of the workshops that had already taken place, it really geared towards the business community. And in the order, it says that we're offering support to businesses and residents in the area of Westchester affected by the moratorium, and that NYSERDA proposes to conduct marketing as well as one-on-one engagement and workshops to educate individuals regarding their options. The more that we can do in terms of community access and informing residents about their incentives will go a long way. So what I would like is two things. One, if we could ask to have some ongoing information about where we are doing all of these workshops, partnering with the AARP, the civic associations, the homeowner associations, making sure that we're all in the low and middle income communities. And then one of the things that you had said, Mr. Kelly, can I call you Ted? Okay. Is that you're going to measure the effectiveness through tracking media performance, website traffic, and activity. There are a lot of people that don't have access to media performance and websites. So I think we have to add another mechanism that we can provide some feedbacks to ensure that we're getting and collecting all of the feedback from everyone, that we're ensuring that we're getting to the communities that are going to be affected by this the most, and that we have a constant feedback loop so that, you know, I do look at this as a work in progress. I think we can modify this as we go along, and we should. But the more information that we could get back from the individual homeowner and what they can do individually to help themselves and the environment would be beneficial. So I am voting in favor. I want to get it out there, but I want to make sure that we're looking at this as continuous improvement.
Certainly, and I think those are elements that the staff team could certainly work with NYSERDA as we're implementing to understand where workshops have been held, where we might plan to offer them, where we might see gaps,
Right.
and then reporting as far as the effectiveness of the awareness program, all angles of that to see, you know, what has been most effective to hitting all the target markets.
Okay, that'd be great, because there are gaps. I mean, they're doing a good job in terms of the business community, but when you look at to date where we have communicated in the residential area, it's minor.
Okay.
Okay,
Noted.
thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, I will proceed to call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to establish a Westchester County Consumer Awareness Program pursuant to Public Service Law Section 74A as discussed. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
No, without prejudice.
Commissioner Alisi?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
In favor.
The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you, Ted and Peggy. We will now move to the second item for discussion, which is item 301, case 18E0717, which is in the matter of the December 2018 Electric Emergency Plan Review, presented by Lori Cornelius, Emergency Preparedness Analyst. Christian Bonvin, Chief in the Office of Resilience and Emergency Preparedness, and Kevin Wisely, Director of the Office of Resilience and Emergency Preparedness, are available for questions.
sure I don't get yelled at by the secretary. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Emergency plans are an integral part of utility strategy to be prepared for and effectively respond to electric emergency events. Each electric utility is required to develop, update, and file with the Commission a detailed emergency response plan that articulates the utility's restoration procedures and processes for emergencies. The plans must comply with Section 66 of the Public Service Law and Title 16 New York Code Rules and Regulations, Part 105. As noted in Public Service Law, Section 6621, all electric emergency response plans must be updated annually and filed on or before December 15th of every year. Following staff's review, the plans are submitted to the Commission for approval. While the primary reasons for the plans are to coordinate restoration efforts, today's plans do much more than detail the technical procedures and processes necessary to restore service. They also focus on the practices required to ensure transparent, accurate, and timely communications with customers, the public, and other outside stakeholders before, during, and after emergency events. A series of significant storms that occurred in 2018, including winter storms Riley and Quinn, prompted a department investigation into all of the New York major electric utilities' preparation and response to these events, and resulted in the 2018 Winter and Spring Storms Investigation Report that was filed on April 18, 2019, under case number 19-M-0285. The utilities were directed to refile their emergency response plans by May 20th, 2019, incorporating the recommendations and explaining why any recommendation should be modified or rejected. Additionally, implementation plans were filed to outline the utilities' actions in response to the recommendations. Where applicable, references to the modified sections of the plans were provided. The 2018 Winter and Spring Storms Investigation Report highlighted several areas in need of improvement within the utilities' electric emergency plans. The item presented today addresses 45 recommendations which apply to all utilities, 54 that applied to NYSEG, and 52 that applied to Con Edison. The remainder of the 94 recommendations were either not directly related to language in the emergency response plans or were not fully developed to be included in the plans at this time. The plans for approval before you today are the culmination of multiple rounds of review by staff in the Office of Resilience and Emergency Preparedness, Office of Electric, Gas, and Water, and Office of Consumer Services. The first review was conducted immediately following the initial plan filings on December 15, 2018, and was done concurrent with staff's investigation of the investigation into the 2018 winter and spring storms. During this review, staff focused on identifying best practices, further clarifying storm roles and responsibilities, enhancing mobilization, demobilization processes, and resource tracking. The second review began in May, once the utilities filed revised emergency response plans and implementation plans to address the recommendations in the 2018 Winter and Spring Storms Investigation Report. During this review, staff determined whether the modifications made to the plans were sufficient to satisfy the intent of the recommendations. Staff held several meetings, phone conversations, and email exchanges with each utility to resolve areas where additional information was necessary or to incorporate recommendations we believe needed to be addressed at this point in time. Staff's review also included identifying opportunities to eliminate ambiguities in specific tasks to set concrete expectations of actions that must be taken by the utilities. As a result, the electric utilities recently filed amended plans that reflect the collaborative efforts between staff and the utilities. It also should be noted that staff conducted an initial review of the PSEG Long Island Emergency Response Plan filed in December and is in the process of reviewing their updated plan submitted in May. I will now highlight some of the major improvements made in the amended plans. Damage assessment is a vital action as it leads to developing appropriate work plans, identifying the type and number of resources needed, and establishing estimated times of restoration. The 2018 Winter and Spring Storms Investigation Report found that NYSEG did not have enough resources dedicated to complete damage assessment and that its emergency response plan lacked detail on engaging damage assessors from non-impacted areas and securing outside resources to supplement internal damage assessment resources. Through discussions with staff, NYSEG's plan now specifies the minimum number of damage assessors needed to perform damage assessment going forward. Processes also exist in all of the plans to ensure damage assessment activities continued by having wire guards deployed timely should an assessor come across a downed line. There was also a staff recommendation for NYSEG to secure contracts with third parties to supplement its damage assessment resources when needed. In its implementation plan, NYSEG offered a bid process timeline. However, it lacked details on the substance of what the anticipated contracts with third parties would include, such as the number of resources being sought. As a result, the order before you directs NYSEG to consult with staff and amend its implementation plan on or before September 15th, 2019. The estimated time of restoration, or ETRs, is critical information for customers to make informed decisions during outage events, as they provide the approximate date and time when an electric utility expects service will be restored after a power outage. Staff worked to implement the ETR-related recommendations to avoid the miscommunication and inaccuracy of ETRs. In addition, the ETR protocols were modified to require utilities to provide regional ETRs on a county basis, that regional and local ETRs represent 95% of impacted customer base, and that references to global ETRs are discontinued once the regional and/or local ETRs are published. Public liaisons serve to communicate information between the utilities and counties and municipalities. The ineffectiveness of municipal liaisons was well documented in the 2018 Winter and Spring Storms Investigation Report, and breakdowns in this process require immediate attention. In the past, the plans reflected the liaison's availability by phone, email, or being physically present in an emergency operations or command center. They did not, however, provide the minimum information that the liaisons need to have at their disposal in order to answer specific questions. Today, the amended plans incorporate a much wider breadth of information a liaison has access to, including daily work plans, crewing numbers and locations, computer systems, circuit maps, and visibility to impacted critical facilities and life support equipment customers. By having the additional information and access to real-time data, the liaisons are now better positioned to provide detailed answers to county and municipal officials. This should also act to reduce the number of questions asked during municipal calls, which are better handled through the liaison process. Lastly, a clear process has been included in the amended plans for liaisons to handle escalated concerns and to obtain additional assistance if they are unable to respond to inquiries by emergency managers or governmental officials. While substantial progress has been made, the plans before you today do not address all of the recommendations. However, where possible, interim processes were included in each plan to comply with certain recommendations, such as the tracking of road closures that prohibit ingress and egress, and the inclusion of the expectation of residential developments with large elderly populations or other similar vulnerable establishments as part of the critical facilities priority categories. While the list may be small at this point, we expect it to grow as additional collaboration between the utilities and counties and/or municipalities continues over the upcoming months. By including these interim processes in the emergency response plans, the utilities are better able to respond than in the past until the processes detailed in the implementation process plans are completed. I do also want to note that Con Edison refiled their emergency plan this morning. And a quick call to them. There was an issue with the revision date. Inadvertently, they had 7/20/19 as the revision date. It now reflects 7/10/19, so that the plan predates your approval on this order. And it also included tweaking some language in the heat staffing matrix, not significant language change and no change to the numbers. This concludes my presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Lori. This is a timely and important item. New York State, I'm afraid, has several danger seasons, and we're now entering into the hurricane season. So it's timely to have these in place. And it's important. Good planning matters, always, but especially in an emergency event. That would be a bad time to do the planning. So, clarity, concreteness, and fitness for purpose. And the purpose in my mind is preparing, protecting, restoring, and communicating. Clarity and concreteness are the only ways to learn from experience, and I note that these plans before us reflect some good learnings and improvements from the 2018 versions, 2017 versions out of the 2018 events. And concreteness and clarity are the only basis for accountability. I am going to support this item. Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. So this, the way the plans came about from commission approval was after Superstorm Sandy in 2013, the legislature, in its wisdom, sought to have the commission approve the plans. And as everyone knows, the plans were always done. It was just then after Superstorm Sandy that the commission itself approved them. And the utilities would file every December 15th now, and then staff would review them, revisions would get made, and then they would come before the commission for approval, and that's been happening since that time. And it shows, I think, the collaboration in working with the legislature and the commission and the different stakeholders. And it's a continuous improvement opportunity. The plans are not meant to be static. And with every event, it's a learning opportunity and to see what we can do to plan. There is a need for alignment and review and to see how not only can the utilities continuously approve, but how we ourselves can continuously approve. And one of the concerns from where I sit is also now some of the lessons learned, having had a few years under our belt in looking at this and the commission approval process. What I like from today's presentation is, one, I think it was a quality presentation. It shows the hard work that went into the plans themselves and the review that went into it from not only the utilities but the staff that's dedicated to the review, and that really shows from that and shows the dedication on that. But it wasn't about a enforcement and a gotcha. It was about what we're going to do now from an action in getting ready for the next event and working together. And you, Lori, talked about collaboration. And that was really the intent, I think, behind the plan and from the commission itself from the very beginning was about the need for these plans to not be static, but to be flexible and to be really live documents to work through so that we were making changes as necessary, and that is really very important. And I say that because these plans are late in coming to us for approval. And so for me, when I look at it, I am glad that they're now here, but we now have to look at a continuous improvement in getting back on track to what is the next step so that as we look forward and have that timeline, we don't get sidetracked with when they come in December next time that we are late in getting them out there, because that can be very disruptive. And understanding that there were, when we look back, what led us to that, some of it was there were enforcement proceedings that were going on, they're continuing to go on, that sidetracked us. And to the extent that all of that also helps to shape the plans, but also can be detractions from the plans. And we need to help make sure that we're working together in a way that is helpful to the overall mission of improving the plans that are helpful to the customers and to the state as a whole. So I just really want to emphasize it's really about the activities that are going on and the experts that are really driving the ship. So don't get detracted by the others. You guys are really sort of the core and the heart of it more than other folks. So that's at least where I come from. I also recognize that as we're doing this, yesterday was Thank a Line Worker Day. So I do just think it's very important that we do take a moment and I think it's important from that perspective. But also on Saturday, it'll be 42 years since the blackout of 1977. So while we talk about weather events, there are other events that happen, and I think it's very important that we keep that in mind as well, because all of these events and keeping the lights on are very, very important. And so our emergency response plans are very, very critical. From my perspective, looking at sort of continuous improvement and having looked at now over the course of these years since 2013, we have had a number of different things, and we have, while we approve these ERPs, emergency response plans, we also do have other things. We have the scorecards, and now we have the resiliency plans that will be starting up. And I want to make sure that we are looking at and independently reviewing the matchup of these. And it may be time for us to clearly, as a commission, identify whether or not there's a true alignment with these, and if there is a reasonableness in the metrics that go into these, and what are we actually looking at when we are putting together the scorecards that are driving some of the things that go into the ERPs, but also what goes into the ERPs versus what goes into the resiliency plans. And then as we look towards that, is there a difference between, things that are the storm hardening versus the resiliency plans and vice versa? Because a lot of it may get tied together, but it does become important from a standards perspective and where things fall in the bucket. And I think that rather than wait to after things, we really do need to have some clear guidelines. And I say that because some of the issues that come from after the fact, with orders to show causes that cause people to be focused on the fight, not on the collaboration. And so I want us to be working together on what makes sense versus we're looking to, where can we get you? It's not about a got you. It's about what makes sense and looking together to help build that and place it in the right bucket, and the reasonableness of that. When that comes into the count, I also recognize that there is a need to look at the escalating costs issue. And so you can look at it, depending on where you sit and where you look. You can look and you could say, well, I look and I see, and there doesn't really seem to be an overall escalation of, the costs for the plans themselves. And, in isolation, the ERPs don't have that big of a implementation escalating costs. It is not necessarily that the plans are the issue. In fact, I don't think the plans are the issue. And we do need effective plans. I think that, and I think what might be helpful is an independent review that helps give us some true root cause analysis, but also some true helpful historical analysis. And it would be easy to say, well, there's, lots more weather events, lots more damages caused. We can look at some of the issues with the trees, et cetera, and we can point to all of that. But we do need to look at, are our expectations and our standards maybe causing some of the escalating costs? And are we also, because we're saying even before, the weatherman says it's going to rain or the weatherman says it's going to snow, saying you better get out there because you might get in trouble. So get out there and send all of your folks out there. That everybody goes out and then there's nothing. So we need to look at that, right? Because that then becomes an issue if they get hit with penalties if they're not there. But if they're there and there's no event and we've called them all out there, but if, so there's this issue, right? There's this catch-22. And so we do need to look at that storm expectations as well, and what is the reasonableness, and what is the commission's reasonableness standard, and have, when it's not in the throes of the event, have some quality conversations and metrics and standards and work through that. And maybe it also is about analyzing those costs and not just deferring them into the rate cases, but having it really done in a way that looks at it outside of the rate case so that some of it also doesn't just get sort of pushed into the rate case we don't highlight it as much, but maybe we can address it through a rider or something else that, maybe helps take care of it, but also helps with the reasonableness of our own expectations, because I do think that we are not fully taking ownership of our own, perhaps at times, unreasonableness that may come. So I do just point that out. I also want to recognize Lori's first time in speaking at session. You did an amazing job, and I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, John Cyprus, do you have a...
Yes, thank you, Chair, and excuse me, Commissioners, for raising this issue right now, but I was actually looking at the last page of the order that you have before you, and I noticed at the end of it, there was not actually a provision that would provide or authorize the Secretary to authorize an extension of time. And so with your indulgence, staff would propose adding that at this time, and I'd be happy to read that in the record so that we are all up to date, if I may. The provision, which would be a new paragraph 4, would be, quote, in the Secretary's sole discretion, comma, the deadline set forth in this order may be extended, period. Any request for an extension must be in writing, comma, must include a justification for the extension, comma, and must be filed at least 1 day prior to the affected deadline, period, close quote. And then what is presently the fourth paragraph would continue on as the fifth paragraph. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the correction. I appreciate the just-in-time nature of it. That addition makes sense to me, and as described, I don't need to amend my comments or inclination to support this item. But Commissioner Berman, do you need to?
So I would just say that I would appreciate if we do this at every session so we can vote affirmatively on whether or not we give the secretary the discretion. Just me.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to look to Commissioner Alisi for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we all do rely on so many people for our everyday conveniences, electricity, et cetera, utilities, not the least of which our heat, our light, all of those things that many of us were in our own minds deprived of at least 5 times over a number of days during that storm period. Most of the time we have favorite baseball teams or football teams and we like them, and we get very angry with them when they lose a game or two or maybe don't make the pennants or the World Series, etc. But maybe it's a weak analogy, but I have to give at least some credit to the fact that the utilities, the department, emergency response teams, everybody involved in a crisis when it happens are out there for us, and we take them for granted, like opening the refrigerator and not only getting something cold, but being able to see what's in there. So I think that what I'm going to support this issue. Some things came out of it that seemed so very obvious, like clearing roads and communicating better. I mean, who would have thought that some things as simple as that just got in the way of restoring our electricity. But with regard to this plan, like any other plan, maybe if the utilities were playing out of a playbook that wasn't updated, it's certainly getting updated, and I believe it will be continually updated. So it's an opportunity for all of us to learn and maybe take a step back and say that we should all be grateful for some of the things that we take for granted. So I'll be supporting this plan. I think it's a good plan.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question. This says that there were 94 recommendations. 45 of them are apply to all utilities. So the ones that are not baked yet and not included in here, I didn't see a date of when that is expected to be included. Is it September 15th or is it next year, or is there any date that we want to have those other recommendations included?
So some of the measures that are not included in the plans today would include collaborative efforts that would include other outside parties. For instance, the joint road closure task force that the report speaks about. We're asking telecommunications companies to be a part of that task force, municipalities, counties, and the utilities. And we're going to play an integral part in getting people to the table, the right parties to the table. But this is going to be a statewide effort, so it's not like we're targeting one specific area, for instance, Westchester County. So it's going to take us a little time to do that. In the meantime, we made sure in the plans that are before you today for approval, there's a backstop. There are clear roles and responsibilities for actions that must be taken during events that have wires down, that block roads, block communities from getting in or out, blocking, for first responders from getting in and out. So to answer your question, we don't have any set time frame. The September 15th date that we referred to was a particular implementation plan from NYSEG that we would like to see more detail on, which is something that will be able to be turned around quickly. The task force, that's probably going to be months in the making, and we're going to get new plans this coming December, which is right around the corner, and hopefully you're going to see some progress made in the rest of those areas that are going to require more time. But unfortunately, I can't really give you a
Okay,
prescribed
so could I then just ask, because there are specific recommendations, and they're important.
Yes.
They're important for the public. They're important for the workers. Can we then get an update in
Absolutely.
September on the remaining recommendations so that at least we don't lose sight of them, and then again in December? Because my concern is if we're not asking for it on a particular date, they're going to fall by the wayside unintentionally. So it would be good if we could get an update on where all of them are,
We'd
right?
be more than happy to
Okay.
do that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I will proceed to call for a vote on the matter. My vote is in favor of the recommendations to approve the amended emergency response plans as discussed. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards, how do you vote?
In favor, yes.
Thank you. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. We now move to the third item for discussion, which is item 401, case 16W0259, as it relates to the Independent Monitor's billing report and interim implementation plan for New York American Water, presented by Mike Reeder, Chief, Gas and Water Rates and Supply, Tim Canty, Chief of Water Policy, and Eric Ryder, Chief of Consumer Advocacy. We'll also present Joe Dowling, Assistant Counsel, and Jeff Hogan, Deputy Director, Management and Operations Audit, are available for questions. Mike, please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Item 401 is a draft order approving the Independent Monitor's billing report for New York American Water. Before Eric goes into more detail on the report, Tim and I will provide you with a recap of what transpired over the last 2 years that culminated in the report that is before you. I'm going to take a moment to pause till we get the slide deck up. Slide 2. Great, thank you. First, I'm going to briefly summarize New York American Water's 2017 rate plan. Tim will then discuss the company's property tax error and staff's report on its investigation of the error. I will then discuss the significant spike in high bill complaints from South Shore customers that occurred during the summer of 2018. The property tax error and the high bill complaints were the basis for the Independent Monitor's South Shore billing review and investigation of the Seacliff District property tax matter at shareholders' expense. Eric will then go into detail on the Independent Monitor final billing report, which is the subject of item 401, and the company's interim implementation plan. Tim will conclude our presentation with a brief status update of the Independent Monitor's review of the property tax error and expected future Commission actions. So let's start with New York American Water's 2017 rate plan. On May 23, 2017, the Commission approved with modification a 4-year rate plan for New York American Water that covered the period April 1, 2017 through March 31, 2021. The rate plan created 2 districts for New York American Water. Service Area 1, which consists of the Lynbrook area and several small water districts, and Service Area 2, which consists of the Merrick and Seacliff areas. The rate plan allowed for levelized increases in revenues for Service Area 1 of approximately $10.1 million annually, and levelized increases in revenues for Service Area 2 of about $3.1 million annually. In addition to the revenue increases, the rate plan contains several important items that are relevant to today's discussion of the Independent Monitor's billing report. First, the rate plan allowed for the reconciliation of revenues and production costs in order to eliminate any disincentive for the company to promote water conservation. The rate plan also put into place a conservation-oriented rate design. The conservation rate is an inclining 4-block rate, which means that the rates charged for a set amount of usage increases as more water is used. For example, the first usage block is for a usage up to 3,000 gallons a month and is charged at a rate of about 46 cents per 100 gallons. The second usage block is for the next 3,000 gallons used and is charged at a rate of about 63 cents per 100 gallons. The third usage block is for the next 9,000 gallons used and is charged at a rate of about 90 cents per 100 gallons. And finally, the fourth block, which is the highest block, is the usage over 15,000 gallons per month and is charged a rate of about $1.18 per 100 gallons. The Commission also adopted a System Improvement Charge, or SIC mechanism, which collects the revenue requirement of capital projects that go into service during the latter years of the rate plan. The capital projects included in the SIC mechanism were fully vetted during the rate case by staff and interested parties. However, because the timing of the completion of the projects was so uncertain, for the protection of customers, it was decided to have the revenue requirement collected in a surcharge after the projects go into service rather than have the associated revenue requirement be built into rates during the course of the rate proceeding. Finally, the rate plan allowed for the reconciliation of property taxes, which is common in all multi-year rate plans because it removes the risk of missing property tax forecasts for both the company and its customers. However, in this case, because of the dramatic increases in property taxes for the Seacliff District, the Commission decided that socialization of property taxes between Merrick and Seacliff was not appropriate at that time and required that the incremental property taxes be collected from Seacliff customers via a separate surcharge. To summarize, the rate plan, which began on April 1, 2017, put into place the needed tools to encourage water conservation to protect the Long Island aquifer. Tim will now share what happened towards the end of 2017.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, Commissioner Rhodes and Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Today I'm going to discuss the property tax error that occurred in the Seacliff Service Territory. In December 2017, 7 months after its rate order, New York American notified staff that it had made significant errors in its property tax filings with the New York State Tax Department spanning several years that impacted rates. In January 2018, the Commission issued an order for staff to investigate the error with 2 primary directives. First, quantify the impact of the error on customers to ensure customers are held harmless. And second, find the causes of the error to ensure something like this does not happen again. In April 2018, staff issued its report quantifying the error, and in August 2018, the Commission issued an order correcting the error. The Commission found that the tax filing error occurred over a 3-year period but impacted 5 rate years. The retrospective error amounted to $2.3 million, but due to customer IOUs and the shutting off of a surcharge, it netted to approximately $300,000, or a $68 refund for each Seacliff customer. Since the error impacted the historic test year in the rate case, it also impacted rates going forward by approximately $2.4 million, what I call the prospective error. The Commission corrected this forecasting error by lowering Seacliff's property tax surcharges and its annual property tax targets. In June 2018, staff issued a report on the causes of the error. In 2012, American Water acquired Seacliff and New York Water Service from Aqua. The root cause of the tax filing error was due to a shuffle in plant accounting data when that data was being transferred from Aqua's information system to American Water's information system. That data was downloaded in Microsoft Excel for uploading into a new system, and the company performed a data sort that did not include all of the columns, and the in-service date was separated from the plant data it was related to. Staff's report found issues in 3 departments at New York American Water. The plant accounting department, where the initial data sort error occurred, New York American Water's tax department, who is responsible for the tax filings, New York American Water's regulatory team, who is responsible for property tax reconciliation filings and rate case filings. The staff report found New York American Water lacked proper controls and was not following some of its existing controls. It found that New York American Water lacked proper supervision and had poor communications within and between departments. And it found certain involved individuals were not following the company's own ethics protocols, and certain individuals withheld known material facts in the rate case and the property tax reconciliation filings. The staff report had specific improvement recommendations in those areas, and that report, together with the high bill complaints that Mike is about to discuss, were the basis for the consent order.
Thank you, Tim. On July 30th, 2018, New York American Water began receiving an influx of high bill complaints from customers on the South Shore of Long Island. The complaints either came directly from customers or from local elected officials on behalf of customers. Over 600 complaints were received in the first week alone. The company immediately notified staff of the steep increase in complaints and assembled a team using many resources from its parent company to investigate the cause of the complaints as well as track and respond to each of the complaints received. Staff set up daily calls with the company to monitor its efforts in determining the cause of the complaints as well as to monitor the company's handling of the complaints. By mid-August, over 1,200 complaints were received by New York American Water. Over the course of 3 weeks, New York American Water evaluated the accuracy of its metering and billing systems and looked for any operational issues that could have resulted in the significant number of high bill complaints received. It soon became apparent that the company's lack of adequate communication to customers about the implementation of the conservation-oriented rate design and educating customers on how they can conserve water led to the South Shore high bill complaints. On August 18, 2019, Governor Cuomo announced an agreement with New York American Water that provided more than $11 million in lowered bills and other benefits for the company's 120,000 customers on Long Island. The agreement provided for accelerated rate relief to all customers, as well as the suspension of the highest rate block of the conservation rate in the South Shore area that surprised many customers due to the company's insufficient advance notice of the rate changes. The agreement also addressed the Commission's findings that the company improperly withheld information related to the property tax assessments in the Seacliff District, which Tim just discussed, and required the company to pay for an independent monitor to oversee complaint handling and the implementation of the new internal controls. On August 29th, the Commission filed a legal action in State Supreme Court in Albany County against New York American Water. The legal action was filed concurrently with a proposed consent order and judgment that resolved the litigation and ensured that customers received the financial benefits promised in the agreement. The consent order and judgment was issued on September 11th, 2018. Specifically, the consent order provided the following relief. It established an independent monitor to investigate the South Shore billing review and the Seacliff District property tax matter at shareholders' expense. It required New York American Water to adopt all internal controls outlined in the 2018 staff report. It accelerated a $7 million refund of the Town of Hempstead Garbage District settlement to customers, and accelerated a $2.3 million credit to customers arising out of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It required the shareholder portion of the Garbage District settlement of about $1 million to be used on a conservation study and rebate program. It also set aside $1 million in shareholder funds to facilitate the Village of Seacliff's acquisition of New York American Water property located in the village. It suspended Block 4 rates for all Service Area 1 customers for rate year 2 at shareholders' expense of up to $2.5 million. It suspended the revenue, production costs, and property tax surcharge as of November 1st, 2018. And finally, it required New York American Water to implement a robust education and outreach program to explain the rate changes to customers prior to implementation of Rate Year 3 and Rate Year 4 increases, and educate customers regarding the conservation-driven inclining block rate design. To put the savings in context for a typical residential customer, a Service Area 1 residential customer using 8,000 gallons a month received a one-time federal tax credit passback of $1.47, received a one-time local tax savings credit of $4.34, and continues to receive an ongoing federal tax credit passback of $2.48 each month. A residential customer using 20,000 gallons during a single month, 20,000 gallons would put it into Tier 4, during a single month between April 1st and October 19th, received a Tier 4 retroactive credit of $4.74. Or if that same customer used 20,000 gallons during a single month between October 22nd and March 31st, the end of Rate Year 2, it would have received a Tier 4 suspension credit in the same amount, $4.74 for that month. For merit customers, a typical residential customer using 8,000 gallons a month received a one-time federal tax credit passback of 64 cents, received a one-time local tax savings credit of $3.90, and receives an ongoing federal tax credit passback of $1.28 each month. For Seacliff customers, again, a typical residential customer using 8,000 gallons a month received a one-time federal tax credit passback of $1.43, received a one-time Seacliff property tax credit of $68.14, and continues to receive an ongoing federal tax credit passback of $1.28 each month. On October 18, 2018, the Commission issued its order authorizing contract for independent monitor to PA Consulting for both the property tax error and South Shore High bill complaint. Concurrently, New York American Water embarked on a conservation study and the development of a robust communication plan for 2019. New York American Water conducted a customer survey to gain insights and understand opportunities regarding water use, receptivity to conservation initiatives, and communication preferences. New York American Water also did a detailed data analysis of consumption data, high usage root cause analysis, sector and spatial analysis, and analyzed the impact of the conservation rates. The customer survey and data research demonstrated that there is a great opportunity for outdoor water use conservation, and that customers want more information about their consumption and are receptive to conservation education. Using the knowledge gained from the customer survey and data analysis, New York American Water and its strategic communication consultant developed a sophisticated communication and conservation campaign, which the company calls H2O Control. H2O Control, which was rolled out in March 2019, went far beyond the regulatory customer notice requirement in advance of the April 1 Rate Year 3 rate increase. Extensive communication has taken place over multiple platforms, including multiple letters to all customers, social media, email, public engagements, and through media coverage. H2O Control provides customers with information to help them understand their consumption and how that translates into their water bill. Information to place their use into context, such as individual letters based upon past consumption and mid-cycle reads, and tools such as conservation tips, home water use audits, and an evapotranspiration watering app coupled with the Ratio 3 smart sprinkler controllers to reduce consumption. New York American Water has provided staff a detailed monthly communication plan that extends through August, includes analytics shared weekly, and is dynamic and designed to adjust to events like weekends, rain, and high temperatures. All in all, quite an improvement in customer education and outreach over last year. On February 25, 2019, New York American Water filed a petition to postpone the Rate Year 3 levelization surcharge for Service Area 1 customers from April 1, 2019 to April 1, 2020. It also proposed to substitute and expand the number of capital projects eligible for cost recovery through the System Improvement Charge and forego the opportunity to file a rate case for an additional year. On February 27, 2019, a one-commissioner order was issued postponing the levelization surcharge to provide economic benefit and reduce customer confusion as New York American Water rolled out its communication plan as provided for in the consent order and judgment. Several procedural orders were issued in March, May, and June. The issues raised in the February 2015 petition will be brought to the Commission for its decision at a later date. Finally, on May 30th, 2019, New York American Water filed to implement a system improvement charge and implement the reconciliation of its rate year 2 revenue, production costs, and property taxes. That brings us up to where we are today, which is the recommended approval of the independent monitor's billing report. For that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Mike and Tim explained the background for New York American Water to hire an independent monitor and the Commission's approval of PA Consulting as the monitor on October 18th, 2018. Item number 401 before you today is a draft order regarding PA Consulting's final report, which evaluated the cause of the elevated number of bill complaints from customers of New York American Water, as well as New York American Water's response to those complaints. The review also looked at New York American Water's billing system, metering devices, communication plan, and how the company handled such complaints. PA Consulting's final report was submitted on June 26, 2019, and found that the predominant reason for the extensive bill complaints was New York American Water's failure to properly communicate two changes to its customers: the inclining block rate structure and the pressing need for additional conservation efforts. PA Consulting found that New York American Water has taken steps to better address customer complaints and improve its performance, but the final report identifies several additional actions which will improve New York American Water's communication with its customers, produce more accurate and timely bills, and reduce customer complaints going forward. The final report includes 23 recommendations for improvement in the following areas: billing system, customer communications, cause of complaints, complaint resolution activities, management processes, and strategies to reduce complaints. In addition, PA Consulting recommends New York American Water meet with staff so that any additional modifications can be identified and help to improve the company's performance in future years. PA Consulting reviewed the company's billing system for accuracy and reviewed meter tests to determine meter accuracy. PA Consulting's review of the company's billing system found that longer billing cycles during July 2018 contributed to higher customer bills, and that proration charges were not defined in New York American Water's tariff. PA Consulting also found meter accuracy did not factor into high bills. In reviewing customer bills, PA Consulting found the July billing cycles ranged from 30 to 35 days, while the August billing cycles ranged from 24 to 31 days. Due to the longer billing cycles and the new inclining block rate structure, some customers received higher than average bills. In addition, PA Consulting determined that customers with shorter billing cycles were charged prorated fees which are not defined in the company's tariff. PA Consulting recommended the company implement controls to limit the billing cycles to 30 to 31 days, define fees in its tariff, and educate affected customers accordingly. In 2017 and 2018, New York American Water used its normal communications to explain rate changes to its customers, which included press releases, bill inserts, newspaper ads, and website updates. The introduction of inclining block rates, however, was not a normal occurrence. PA Consulting reviewed the company's communication methods to determine if the company explained the new rate structure and underlying reasons for the change or conservation opportunities for customers to save water. PA Consulting found that the company's communications sent to customers did not outline the impact the inclining block rate structure could have on customer bills, or the need for water conservation to provide long-term protection of the Long Island aquifer. PA Consulting concluded the company failed to adequately educate its customers about the inclining block rate structure and recommends the company's future communication plans include a detailed explanation of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's goal of reducing peak season water usage by 15% to ensure the long-term sustainability of the Long Island aquifer, and how conservation rates or inclining block rate structures are a part of that plan. PA Consulting also advises that future communication plans include targeted messaging that draws customer attention to rate changes, information about the likely impacts to customers' bills, and ways that customers could better control their usage. The final report states New York American Water should proactively notify its customers and stakeholders through numerous communication channels and meetings prior to implementing any new surcharges or change to an existing surcharge. PA Consulting recommends the company develop rebate partnerships with various vendors on water conservation products. In addition, PA Consulting recommends the company work with staff to develop and implement a program to monitor the progress of communication improvements and complaint reduction. This program should include regular performance reporting and updated action plans to ensure events like the summer of 2018 do not reoccur. PA Consulting sampled 120 complaints received by New York American Water in July and August 2018 to determine the causes of complaints. PA Consulting also reviewed training documents used by customer service representatives to handle high bill complaints. PA Consulting found that most of the complaints were related to high bills, and the customers had high bills and fell into Tier 4 of the inclining block rate structure, with the majority having experienced a year-on-year bill increase of greater than 50% compared to July 2017. PA Consulting found that the complaint tracking was comprehensive during the peak complaint period. New York American Water opened and closed complaints on a daily basis, closed Public Service Commission complaints on a weekly basis, identified the reason for the complaint, and had appropriate tracking information. PA Consulting did determine that root cause analysis of complaints was not completed beyond an initial assignment of cause, and that no information was readily available on how long it takes to close complaints or complaint resolution cycle times. PA Consulting conducted a review of weather data to determine if usage was higher from outdoor irrigation usage, which is affected by wetter or hotter than normal weather. PA Consulting found that weather was not a contributing factor to complaints because July 2018 was slightly wetter than July 2017, and the temperature in July 2018 was almost the same as July 2017, which was close to normal. Overall, PA Consulting determined that bill increases were not solely driven by a sudden change in customer behavior, rather likely by a combination of some change in customer behavior, price changes, and longer than average billing cycles. PA Consulting recommends the company categorize complaints and conduct a root cause analysis of recurring outliers. PA Consulting recommends New York American Water review all complaints every 6 months to validate the root cause and determine if necessary remedial action was taken, and initiate a complaint resolution cycle time to determine the average time it takes to address customer complaints to satisfaction. PA Consulting reviewed New York American Water's complaint handling procedures, focusing on the source and the process. New York American Water's customer advocacy team receives escalated complaints from multiple sources. PA Consulting found that the company responds within 2 hours for complaints that are related to collections, urgent service issues, or no water calls, and to all complaints no later than the next business day. PA Consulting determined the company's complaint handling procedures did not contribute significantly to the problems which gave rise to this review and stated that the company's procedures are working well. PA Consulting found the company made several managerial and process changes during the summer of 2018 to address the high volume of customer complaints. These changes included additional field resources, suspension of Tier 4 block rates, suspension of normal credit and collections, suspension of late payment fees, daily meetings and interactions with staff, lowering high bill exceptions from $1,000 to $500 prior to the bill being sent to customer, in reaching out to customers who complained to outside agencies or by social media and not directly to the company. PA Consulting reviewed written responses to customer complaints and made directly to New York American Water and sampled its resolution activities. Letters sent in response to customer complaints did not address ways for customers to conserve, and therefore, PA Consulting recommends the company include information about conservation measures in future customer communications. PA Consulting reviewed New York American Water's management processes by analyzing billing exceptions, average customer usage, estimated meter reading and call answer rates, as well as customer satisfaction and budget billing. The company established 3 parameters for a billing exception, or bill outlier, to occur. Only one of the 3 parameters is needed to be true for the company to review the bill before it's sent to the customer. Consumption is 6 times greater than the same prior year period. The current period bill is greater than $1,000, or the total bill is greater than $5,000. During August 2018, when complaints spiked, the company revised and lowered its bill exception parameter from $1,000 to $500 to help minimize the potential for customers receiving inaccurate bills. PA Consulting compared New York American Water's average residential water consumption to all other American Water customers nationwide and found that average consumption at New York American Water was significantly higher. High volume months were about twice the average elsewhere, representing 5,000 to 6,000 gallons more. PA Consulting reviewed the amount of estimated meter reads and found that they accounted for 3.3% of all bills issued in 2015, 2016, 2017, and the first 10 months of 2018. The percentage was lower and improved at the end of 2018, but PA Consultant indicated that this is a relatively high percentage, with the top performing utilities averaging around 1%. PA Consulting stated that estimated bills, in particular consecutive estimates, are often a contributing factor to usage-related complaints. PA Consulting reviewed the average time to answer calls during the months of July through October 2018 and found the company maintained an average speed to answer calls with a range of 2 minutes and 48 seconds to 6 minutes and 37 seconds. Despite a call volume increase of 900%, customer service answer time only increased by 20%. PA Consulting reviewed overall customer satisfaction and reported deterioration of customer satisfaction for overall satisfaction, customer service representatives' overall performance, and ease of use of the company's website. PA Consulting reported that only 170 customers served by New York American Water are registered for the budget billing plan, which may conflict with sending appropriate price signals through the inclining block rate structure. PA Consulting recommends the company complete a root cause analysis of billing exceptions to help balance billing accuracy with efficient management of the billing process and reduce the number of estimated bills. PA Consulting recommends the company maintain its focus on customer satisfaction in 2019 and measure performance with customer surveys. Moreover, PA Consulting recommends the company complete an analysis to determine if budget billing plans undermine conservation efforts. PA Consulting recommends the company develop a comprehensive complaint reduction strategy with objectives, goals, targets, and initiatives. PA Consulting further recommends New York American Water report internally on the status of meeting its objectives and develop a strategy to facilitate management review and decision making. While the bill complaint situation was created primarily due to the lack of communication on the company's part, New York American Water was very responsive to what was occurring as the complaints mounted. It handled the volume of complaints well and worked closely with staff to resolve the issues. PA Consulting states in its final report that the company provided needed access to New York American Water employees and were very forthcoming with data. Further, the company's suspension of Tier 4 block rates and late payment fees for rate year 2 of the rate plan provided a measure of relief for affected customers. On June 26, 2019, in conjunction with the final report, New York American Water submitted an interim implementation plan in which New York American Water accepted all recommendation made by PA Consulting. For each recommendation, the company identified the steps it has taken or will take to implement the recommendation, the timing of such, and how New York American Water will demonstrate that it has completed those steps. As outlined in its interim implementation plan, the company has already acted in multiple ways to improve communications with customers in 2019, and it has already begun to address the recommendations in the final report. The draft order stresses that New York American Water remain vigilant regarding customer complaints and finding opportunities to improve in the areas covered in the final report. The draft order recognizes the time sensitivity of PA Consulting's recommendations, as well as the need for public input on the company's implementation approach. The draft order accepts the interim implementation plan as filed and states the plan will be released for public comment in accordance with the State Administrative Procedure Act. During the public notice period, the draft order directs the company to continue its efforts to implement the final report's recommendations. The draft order directs the company to meet with staff on or about August 1st, 2019, to discuss its implementation progress and staff's review of submitted deliverables regarding its implementation plan. The draft order requires the company to meet again with staff within 30 days after the completion of the SAPA review period or post-summer review period to review the comments received on the interim implementation plan, as well as review the company's performance during 2019 for continued improvement going forward. The draft order requires New York American Water, after consultation with staff, to identify improvements or modifications to its interim implementation plan and submit a final implementation plan to the Secretary to the Commission no less than 30 days after the post-summer review period. After the filings are made, the Commission can review the proposed final implementation plan and either approve or modify at that time. And now I will turn it over to Tim.
Thanks, Eric. PA Consulting is currently at the beginning stages of the property tax part of its review, and that review is expected to last until 2021, when we anticipate New York American Water's next rate filing. The October 2018 order approving the selection of PA Consulting requires them to review New York American Water's internal controls related to property taxes, review New York American Water's process for engaging with the New York State Tax Department, review New York American Water's process for ensuring accuracy of general rate filings, and review the implementation of recommendations contained in the June 2018 staff report. PA Consulting has begun its property tax review. It has conducted a series of interviews with regulatory, ethics, property tax, and plant accounting staff. It is currently reviewing New York American Water's 2019 ORPS property tax filing and the property tax reconciliation filing New York American Water recently made with us. PA Consulting is required to report its results to the department as well as New York American Water's senior management and board of directors. PA Consulting has been providing monthly updates on its progress to staff and has been submitting and will continue to submit the required quarterly reports regarding its investigation of the property tax issue. Now we're going to update you on future commission actions. The final implementation plan for the billing report is expected to be ready for commission action later this year. Staff also expects that the issues raised in the company's February 25th petition and the rate year 2 revenue and property tax reconciliations will be ready for commission action in the fall of this year. The timing of the commission's action on the Section 70 sale of the Seacliff property is contingent on the parties coming to an agreement, and the property tax monitor's final report and any associated implementation plan is expected in 2021. That concludes our presentation. Eric, Mike, Jeff, Joe, and I are available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mike, Tim, and Eric. This is an important milestone. New York American Water had a tough year last year, and even more so, so did their customers. Since then, the staff has worked very hard and very well with, I'm glad to note this, good responsive engagement from the company, which has gotten us to the point of having an independent monitor in place, and therefore the billing independent monitor report that's now before us. This, to me, is well done. It's thorough, factual, and clear about failures and remedies, and that's also true of the planning and implementation planning and the other actions described. I'm encouraged that we're learning lessons, and I'm encouraged at the corrective actions that are underway. We do need to stay vigilant and demand much better performance going forward. I'm going to support this item. Commissioner Berman.
I think I said everything that you said I could very much agree with. I think it was well stated. I just want to have you pull up a few of the slides. If that's, I don't know who does that. So is that okay?
Not us.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Okay. Sorry. So I think slide 25. I think it just will be easier than my. Actually, it's not that slide. It's maybe the one before it. Yes, it's 24. The last bullet says complete an analysis to determine if budget billing plans undermine conservation efforts. And I just want to point out, I think that we do have challenges whenever we look at budget billing, and it's not just limited to whether budget billing is undermining conservation efforts. It's really any efforts when you're trying to change behavior when you have budget billing. Budget billing can have unintended consequences of not changing behavior. So it may be helpful for there to look at what's been done in other situations where we have encountered budget billing and it has not been helpful for behaviors that we want to change, and if that's been a problem or not. So to the extent that there may have been studies done or not, it's not just really limited to conservation efforts. And I'm not really sure if and really I guess I'm trying to get an assessment of what are we really trying to get out of here. If an analysis shows that, yes, sometimes some people who are on budget billing don't look at their bills then, so that then they're not conserving. So what do we do with that, right? Do we then say to them, look at your bills more, or don't have budget billing because you're not conserving? Like, what is then what are we looking to do with that information, I guess, is really supposed to be, for us, it's the analysis to do what with, right?
Right. So they're going to study whether, as you said, they'll study whether or not budget billing hinders conservation efforts. And once we have information that either supports that or doesn't support that, we'll have to develop a strategy on how to deal with that.
Right.
So it's too early to tell you what we're going to do.
Right.
But it's certainly we have to look at the information.
Right. And then I guess it also
Develop a
depends for certain people, depending on, there's other factors too, right? Whether or not you can afford to pay your bill, whether you have a budget bill or not, it doesn't matter. Whether your bill goes up and down may not matter if you can afford to pay your bill, if you have it electronically or not. So there's other factors outside of budget billing and the payment of your bill. So just to sort of struck me, it could be a deeper analysis, so we may be going, while I think it's helpful, I just want to make sure that we've sort of, make sure before we go forward that we kind of look at what is it exactly that we're trying to get at, and whether what resources we're expending into that's actually going to be helpful or not, so that we, take the appropriate time, but also not sort of go down a rabbit hole that gives us a lot of information that then be like, okay, now what do we do with it? That's all. I just want to point that out.
Thank you.
And then I think I want to go to, I think it's now slide 26, but obviously my numbers were wrong. So, yes, this is. So on here, there's the interim implementation plan. I think this is very helpful. I do like that while these were a lot of slides with a lot of words, so it's very, very helpful, lays out historically as well as the going forward and the action. So these slides will be available for folks after session, right? They'll be on our website, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, just making sure. It says that the company is to meet with staff on or about August 1st, 2019, and the company's to meet again with staff. And I think that's also good that you'll be engaging with them. But I do just want to point out that there have been, just please keep in mind my own sensitivities to the fact that the commission itself and each of the commissioners needs to also be engaged in a way that is appropriate. I have not been comfortable at times when there has been what I feel can be actions that happen that I find out after the fact. When filings get made, and emergency actions get done and I'm not aware of, and it turns out that staff has been, working with folks. I just want to make sure that there's an engagement in a timely fashion with commissioners so that, we are all given appropriate time to process things in a way that us as decision makers can be involved in this in a real way. It's very important to me, especially because we don't have to go back to it, but on slide 13 it talks about executive actions as well as then counsel going to court. And a lot of that I felt uncomfortable with because for me it was more about the commission itself has the opportunity to take its own action without necessity to go outside of its own commission orders and enforcement. And I don't want to lose that authority, and I also don't want to then be left to just approving what's been done by others. So for me, when I saw slide 13 and slide 26, it was very important to me to be focused on that my role is not, one that is insignificant. So I just point out that to the extent that engagement with all of the commissioners is very important. And then the other is going back to slide 31. Thank you. This also, the future commission actions, this slide is, I think, very helpful. I look forward to looking at the final implementation plan. I think this report is going out there. It's getting sapid. It'll be noticed. I look forward to all stakeholders giving us information and comments so that we could look at, what we may want to do as a commission on that. And then we would have the opportunity to adopt that final implementation plan. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so it's not sort of the end of the story.
Nope.
And then the February 25th petition is also it also has already been sapid and noticed.
That's correct.
Comment period ends when?
It's a good question.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to blindside you with that. I should have.
It's probably over already.
Okay. But people can still file comments if they want to, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and we anticipate that coming onto a session in the near future.
Sometime later this year.
Sometime later this year. And at that time, we'll be looking at those attributes that, to the extent that all of that will get flushed into the different things. So what aspects of that have people commented already?
I'm not familiar with the comments that were received. I'm not familiar with any of the comments that received.
Have we done any public outreach in terms of a hearing or anything like that?
It's not a procedural.
Okay, so there's been no conference or anything.
No.
Okay, it's just a paper. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Lisi?
Thank you, Chairman. Something did impress me about this. First of all, I was a little bit surprised by the failures of the company that were brought to light. But very quickly after that, company officials reached out personally, and I was impressed by the fact that they were willing to own mistakes that they made. They actually were contrite, apologetic, and in the same paragraph, they promised to take every step necessary to do better. And I would compliment the action taken by hiring the outside consulting firm, which I think did a pretty good job of providing us with the information that we're seeing here today so that we can make better decisions. I'm looking forward to, I think there's next contact early in August and later in the year when we'll see some more things. But without seeming overly confident, I'm hopeful that things will continue to improve. It seems as though they've laid out a plan, and a plan that can be followed, that they're willing to follow and they want to follow. And to the extent that the department and the commission can be helpful with that, that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, the service to the people is what matters, and that's why we're all here. So I'll be supporting the issue.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Edwards?
Thank you, Chair Rhodes. So I don't even know where to start. Let me start with saying thank you again to all of you. I probably know more about American Water in the last 3 weeks. This is a really important issue. I was uncomfortable with some of the language, as all of you know, in terms of approving what is here, because quite frankly, I think that they have a lot more to do in terms of communication. But I am cognizant and do agree that the best step for us is to approve this and to get it out for public comment so that we could make sure that we are holding American Water accountable, that the residents have an opportunity to comment on the plans that they have. I do want to ask just a couple of questions. So how quickly does this go out for public comment after today?
We're preparing a SAPA notice that will be published in the New York State Register. That should go out on Tuesday. I believe there's a week delay before it's published.
Okay.
And then we'll be open for comments.
Okay. And will they, American Water, proactively communicate with the state, county, and local elected officials? And the reason why I'm saying that is because just like the PSC received a lot of the complaints, so did all of the elected officials. And the communication form that I asked for, it looks like that American Water was responsive to the complaints of the elected officials, but it was on that specific item, that individual complaint. So what I want to make sure is that they are proactively sharing this information with all of the public servants that we have.
So staff meets with New York American Water on a biweekly basis to go over where they are with this summer.
Mike, can you get closer, perhaps? Or
So they meet with staff on a biweekly basis to for us to monitor where they are in their progress with the summer of 2019, what they're doing with their communication plans, who they're reaching out to. We will make sure that the company reaches out to local elected officials and shares with them the draft order, or excuse me, the order once it's issued, and the interim implementation plan.
Okay, because I may have shared with you during my confirmation hearings, all of the elected officials spoke about this issue. So I think it's important that all of the elected officials get some information on that as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the company has been communicating very well with all local elected officials on the island from really beginning, at the end of the summer last year or during the high bill complaint issue, starting then, going through the winter period, during their development of their communication plan. It's a very high priority for them, and we continue to monitor their activities in that regard.
And what opportunity do we have as commissioners to add recommendations? So, for example, I looked at the 2019 communication plan, and I think that there are more things that can be added to their communication stream. So I know that we have 23 recommendations. So I want to know, do I have an opportunity between now and during the public comment period to suggest other things, or how does that work?
So are you asking if you have an opportunity to suggest other things that they can do with their communication plan?
Correct.
Or their implementation plan?
Well, overall, in not anything new as it relates to the management controls, the communication, the things that are included in the recommendations. Looks like there's 23. If there are additional ones, would I be able to have an opportunity to suggest more?
Absolutely. Well, staff would be glad to meet with you to hear any commissioner's concerns or thoughts on how the interim implementation plan could be improved. That's why it's out there for comments as well to the public and any other stakeholder who wants to weigh in. So the end product will be a final implementation plan that the company will be putting together. Staff will be meeting with the company. Staff will be looking at a draft of that final plan. We can give feedback to the company as well on where we think it needs to be beefed up, and that could be informed by a discussion with yourself or other commissioners.
Okay.
And at the time the final implementation plan comes to you, if that final product you had a concern about, that could also be raised, and the final implementation plan could be with the commission's approval, be modified.
Okay. I just want to make sure that it's not simultaneous. I want to be able to have an opportunity to look at the feedback that comes in from the public comment and then see if we have an opportunity to say, they pointed out a really good issue, let's give this recommendation, so that, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what's going to come in, right? So I guess the other piece of it is, in the order it says any request for an extension must be in writing. Is that extension on the comment period, or is that an extension for what?
So it's an extension for any of the deadlines that are raised in the order. It is not an extension for the comment period.
Okay. So when would you expect the final implementation plan to be ready?
We would expect that final implementation plan to be filed sometime in the October, perhaps. I think October is our best guess right now of when the company would have, have made its changes to the interim implementation plan, based on comments it's received, feedback from staff. That August 1st meeting that was discussed, the meeting 30 days after the end of the irrigation season. So I would expect that by October, all that will be baked in. We'll get that report will come in. That'll be well after the deadline for the comments under SAPA. So those are public comments. You would be able to see those. And you could certainly, as you said, pick one out or more that you think are meritorious and that you believe should be considered in the final implementation plan. We can make sure that that plan addresses those concerns.
Okay.
And it would come to you probably in the November-December timeframe, depending on how all those moving parts work.
Okay. I am concerned about the balance billing, and I also want to make sure that what they are communicating in the toolbox that they have, the same information is included in the bill inserts for those seniors. I just want to make sure there's consistency in the communication. I can't tell from that. Like, I have the listing of what it is that they are communicating in terms of their August communication plan, but it feels like they are emailing one thing, bill inserting another thing, and I want to make sure that there's consistency, that all customers are receiving all of the information in different ways of communication.
Absolutely, and that has been the company's intent, to make sure that there's a consistent communication using multiple platforms based on the customer's desire for how they want to receive their information. Some customers don't look at their bills, don't look at their inserts. They want to get it by social media, and the company's been doing that.
Okay.
When we meet with the company next Wednesday, I'll be sure to bring this back to their attention to make sure that all customers are receiving a consistent communication.
Okay, because we got to watch this. This is really, I guess, unbelievable would be a good way to describe this. And, the other commissioners are right. They are doing what they can to clean this up, but they got a lot of cleanup here. So I think we should get this going, and I'm going to approve this, but there's a lot more work to be done, I think, in this matter. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, I will move to call for a vote on this item. My vote is in favor of the recommendations to approve the Billing Independent Monitor final report, release the interim implementation plan for public comment, and direct New York American Water to take further actions as discussed. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Lisi, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards, how do you vote?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. So we have one more regular item, but can I break protocol a bit and ask my colleague commissioners and our colleague stenographer if they need a break to stretch?
Can I just go to the ladies' room?
You don't have to explain, but yes. That was not on the record, was it?
They'll get used to it.
Okay. Now somebody has to tell me where the ladies' room is.
It's right next to the men's room.
Let's resume if we could. We're now at the fourth item for discussion. Item 501, case 15M0388 et al. As it relates to the 2019 settlement agreement with Charter Communications, presented by Brian Asias, Managing Attorney, and Debbie LaBelle, Director, Office of Telecommunications. John Sipos, Acting General Counsel, is available for questions, and you've all taken a seat at the table, so please begin.
Good morning, Chairman Rose and Commissioners. My name, as indicated, is Brian Osius. I'm with my colleagues, Debbie LaBelle, Director of the Office of Telecommunications, and John Sipos, Acting General Counsel. we will be presenting the following item. Before you is item 501, consisting of an order adopting a 2019 settlement agreement and reconsidering other related actions in cases 15M as in Mary 0388 and 18M as in Mary 0178. Before I begin with a review of the background and some of the issues that underline the settlement agreement, I would like to point out a minor address, which I believe has been circulated to the Commission in red line. A minor correction on page 3. We have deleted the reference to compliance order in one spot on page 3, and we have reinserted it to correctly identify that the June 27, 2018 order, the July 27, 2018 order is in fact the correct reference for the compliance order throughout the document. So, by way of background, on January 8, 2016, the Commission approved the joint petition of Time Warner Cable and Charter Communications, Inc., seeking to approve the merger of the two companies. At that time, the Commission explicitly conditioned its approval on a host of conditions designed to yield incremental net benefits. Among those established conditions was a network expansion condition, wherein the Commission initially required that extension of Charter's network to pass an additional 145,000 unserved and underserved homes and businesses within 4 years of the close of the transaction. However, as a result of delays in Charter's deployment, in February 2017, Charter and DPS staff began their first settlement discussions aimed at modifying the timeline of the company's network deployment associated with the network expansion condition. The results of those discussions was a settlement agreement adopted by the Commission on September 14, 2017. While the 2017 settlement agreement addressed specific concerns over the company's build-out schedule and construction milestones, it did not address issues associated with where Charter was required to deploy its network under the network expansion condition, as those issues had not yet manifested themselves. Subsequently, Charter and the department staff did disagree on the eligibility of certain addresses included in Charter's network expansion condition reports. What followed was the issuance of several Commission orders seeking to clarify which addresses were eligible and which addresses were not eligible, culminating in the Commission's revocation order and compliance order. Subsequent discussions ensued between Charter and DPS staff aimed at resolving the network expansion condition disputes related to the areas of deployment throughout Charter's footprint. After several months and many extensions, Charter and DPS staff ultimately filed the 2019 settlement agreement on April 19, 2019, which is before you today for consideration. The 2019 settlement agreement is a reasonable resolution to the disputes that arose in this proceeding and will result in Charter's network expansion efforts being completed in a focused manner. The 2019 settlement agreement fully and finally resolves all of the issues and concerns raised and or asserted or that could properly have been raised and or asserted with regard to the disputes that gave rise to the Commission's revocation order and compliance order and subsequent New York State Supreme Court litigation. Charter's New York customer base will benefit from the further deployment of Charter's video, telephone, and broadband network on a schedule that Charter has agreed is achievable. However, the 2019 settlement agreement includes consequences should Charter fail to meet those important milestones. The 2019 settlement agreement not only furthers consumer interests, but it provides stronger incentives for Charter to meet its future build-out commitments. The revisions to Charter's build-out schedule are reasonable and will require that Charter meet its original commitment to pass 145,000 premises, albeit 18 months later than originally anticipated. Additionally, the 2019 settlement agreement ensures that all of the network expansion will take place outside of New York City. Further, the continuation of Charter's communications plan and web portal established in the 2017 settlement agreement will provide those with access to broadband service the information that they need to determine whether they will be eligible to receive service under Charter's revised build-out commitment here. As a result of the 2019 settlement agreement, many of the actions previously taken by the Commission have been rendered moot. Those actions include the order denying Charter Communication Inc.'s response to order to show cause and denying good cause justifications dated June 14, 2018. The order on compliance dated June 14, 2018, however, only with regard to the network expansion condition. The order confirming missed June 2018 compliance obligations and denying good cause justifications issued July 27, 2018, which is now correctly referred to in the draft order as the compliance order. The order denying petitions for rehearing and reconsideration and revoking approval issued July 27, 2018. And finally, the March 19, 2018 order to show cause in case 18M as in Mary, 0178, which is the proceeding to investigate whether Charter Communications, Inc. and its subsidiaries providing service under the trade name Spectrum had materially breached the New York City franchise agreement. I will now turn it over to Debbie LaBelle, who will summarize the 2019 settlement agreement in more detail.
Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. As part of the 2019 settlement agreement, Charter, among other things, explicitly agrees to include no addresses within the boundaries of the City of New York as a passing, include only residential or business units located outside of the boundaries of the City of New York and which are not passed, served, or capable of being served by either a standard or non-standard installation by pre-existing network from Charter or any other provider capable of delivering broadband speeds of 100 megabits per second or higher. Include up to, but no more than, 9,500 addresses located within the boundaries of Charter's municipal cable franchises in Albany, Buffalo, Mount Vernon, Rochester, Schenectady, and Syracuse. Include up to, but no more than, 9,400 addresses required to be passed pursuant to a grant awarded through the new New York broadband program to a wireline service provider other than Charter. Include up to, but no more than, 30,000 addresses in upstate New York that are both identified by Charter in its plan of record and awarded by the Broadband Program Office through the new New York broadband program by a grant to a wireless or satellite service provider other than Charter. Charter also agreed to a new schedule for completion of its build-out with interim milestones, payments for missed interim milestones in the amount of $2,800 for each individual missed eligible passing below the applicable interim milestone. They also agreed to use any funds remaining in the escrow account following Charter's completion of the network expansion condition to fund additional network expansion efforts. They agreed to place $6 million in escrow within 60 days of Commission adoption of the proposed 2019 settlement agreement for the purpose of funding broadband expansion incremental to those required in the settlement agreement and as directed by the Department, and make a one-time deposit of $6 million into a fund dedicated to financing incremental broadband expansion projects selected by the Broadband Program Office. That concludes our presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I'm going to support this item. We have before us a settlement that resolves a number of open matters and delivers for New Yorkers, especially in underserved areas of the state, with a company that is committed and accountable. And we've just heard the salient points. It's been a tough process, and I'm glad that we have at this point a substantive, good resolution. In all this, there are lessons to be learned, including how to improve process for even greater effectiveness. I chose our path on this matter out of the fullest and strongest conviction that the public interest demanded it. In fact, 145,000 public interests that were rightfully expecting upstate broadband access. I know there's been some discussion of this, but I can't be impeded from pursuing that public interest just because others read the facts as I do and just because others agree with my direction. One additional note, I believed and believe I was right in my belief that we needed to move quickly as well as strongly, which meant as soon as possible, which meant as soon as some of the impediments to our action had lapsed. And this led to my calling for a special session just about 1 year ago. I regret that this step that I took meant that one of my colleagues, Commissioner Berman, couldn't participate in our discussions that day. And that concludes my remarks. Commissioner Berman, over to you.
Thank you. I do appreciate you acknowledging that you regret having gone forward with the session without me. I do note that, as I've stated publicly since that time, that I felt there were procedural missteps. I recognize that you are the chair and had the discretion, and for your reasons chose to go forward with the special session, and I leave it to you for that. And there is a high burden as chair to weigh all those decisions and make the determination. And I do not, the decisions we make as energy regulators need to be made not on substance, need to be made based on the substance of the matters before us, and not based on personal positions on how we feel about that. I do have concerns, as I had expressed then, and will continue to, in no one's voice being overlooked or being silenced, even if it was not intended. And you can't cure someone's, can't cure after the fact, even if one tries to. But I do recognize that a sorry is offered, and I accept that, and that's meaningful. I also recognize that where I sit is as the only commissioner who was here at the time of the merger and the approval of that merger. And it was the first time that we were approving a large merger of its kind, and looking at the public interest standard outside of our normal jurisdiction, and including broadband, and looking at doing things that were to enhance and to help spur competition and access beyond what was normal communication for folks. And there are probably lessons to be learned in that approval process, and in terms of things that we had done, and agreements that we entered into at that time, thinking that we were, it was all going to be easier. in meeting and targets that we were setting. And as time has shown, some of the things that we thought were easy, whether it was the company thought it was easy or we thought it was easy or there were other attributes, led to some difficulties and challenges, and led to also confusion on what we actually meant and some engagement on that. And it really meant that we had to take a step back and focus on, in my mind, more of a collaborative nature and engagement. I am disappointed in some of the, what I think is more of a, at times became too volatile and too much about, not about figuring out the pathways forward, but more about grandstanding for, taking shots at folks for whatever reasons, and didn't necessarily get to helping to figure out positive pathways and solutions, but more about putting people in difficult positions. So for me, I think the kind of some of the lessons that I would think are very important is that when I look back at the merger and then going forward and all the different lessons, it's some of the same lessons that I would say are important for us in all of our proceedings. And some of it I've said before, but I think it's worth repeating, especially as we have a new commissioner here. And I think as we go forward and our path forward is, I do think that there is not one perfect way to be a regulator. But I do think an active openness to continuous learning and improving are critical. And I do think that a good energy regulator recognizes the need for independence and true transparency and consumer and investor protections and instilling the public confidence and being forward-thinking while understanding our history of what got us here. And I do think that it means having actively engaged regulators, and we must be focused on both our historical and present context of our regulations. And doing so can help shape and understand our desired future regulatory needs and can help to find short and long-term economically sound solutions and encourage true sustainable innovation and ensure a continuous drive to improve, whether it's the reliability and resiliency of the grid or the telecommunications infrastructure, and foster productivity and growth. And we as regulators can and must strive to do this through timely, sensible, and thoughtful regulatory approval processes with decisions that give clarity and certainty while also allowing some level of flexibility so as not to become stagnant and stale. So we can't just continuously pat ourselves on the back and say we designed well rules and regulations and we went after folks and enforced, had enforcement actions and we mandated actions and we brought them to their knees and we succeeded then in producing good regulatory outcomes. The ends don't always justify the means. And we have to be mindful of our regulatory powers and how we use them. And we have to focus on using judiciously our powers. We can't just be reactive. We're supposed to be developing policies and helping to set up the frameworks together to implement so that we truly are moving forward in a way that has long-lasting soundness. So for me, it is important for us to take a step back and look. And I do have some questions more in the weeds on the order that's separate and apart, that gets into sort of the heart of some of the questions on the settlement. But I do just want to take a pause on some of the processes. And it's not about sort of going down the road of, the special session and should it have happened, shouldn't have not happened. It happened. The chair, in his discretion, decided to have it. It is what it is. And now, for us, it's a question of what does that mean? And the issue really is, going forward, it's the certainty in that, for me, is that getting past it means that that type of activity, that type of special session, I cannot fear that that will happen again. That if I go out of town, that there may be a special session without me. That I have to have worries about that doesn't mean just because that each and every one of us needs to feel that we are part of the whole. And so that also gives regulatory certainty to all of the parties and stakeholders, that we are all operating together. And that, I think, is a very powerful message. And the choices work together. And that if there is a session where someone can't be there, there are certain circumstances that work and that are understood for why that may happen, but that it is a together decision for whatever the reasons may be. And obviously there may be certain emergency situations outside of a person's own reasons that may mean that a special session needs to happen, but that there needs to be, not for an event, just like when we talked earlier today on 301 and emergency responses, we can't be having the conversation in the moment of the crisis or the issue, because that will be too volatile and not the right time. So we do need, for going forward, to understand and have some confirmation. But that gets to the heart of then sort of our processes in general and some of the things that I've been saying on others in terms of when we decide things and how things work. And some of the issues that we've seen is when people have asked for more time for filing comments, or they filed comments and we don't decide something for a long time, and then all of a sudden we do. We need to have some type of way of people understanding what our process is and why something popped up or why something seems to languish, and a recognition of that uncertainty of things languishing for no reason at all, or why all of a sudden something just seems to pop on there, and maybe sort of a way of getting people to have an opportunity maybe to brush up on whether or not they do, if they haven't responded, if they haven't updated their comments since 2016, and now we're about to decide something, not overnight have them have to say, wait, but give them time to say, just so you know, this, we need to get an idea of what you might be deciding or something. So those are food for thought and regulatory attributes that I think might help us in us giving people the feeling of regulatory certainty and producing and encouraging people to feel that we are invested in producing good results and working together truly to for the benefit of all. And it is really important that we don't just do the bare minimum. And so if we have processes, if we are just checking the box to say, yes, we filed that SAPA, but we know that no one really saw it, think about who it may impact and make sure that we have engaged in a way. If we're filing a, if there's a tariff filing that no one ever is really going to read, and we know that deep down it actually is going to impact certain customers in a way that they wouldn't necessarily understand, it's on us as commission to be obligated to explain it a little bit more and make sure that we are really doing that due diligence and engaged in that way, especially if it has statewide implications. Why do I share this in charter when we're doing that? Because it is that impactful, and because the process for me was broken, but I think it is very much going forward something that is repairable and something that we are all of us are engaged in being much more mindful of. You heard the chair's remarks, and I think he is very engaged in taking heart of in fixing that part of it, and that to me is very impactful. As you know, I did have concerns with the petition for rehearing and not having the petition for rehearing filed. That was, I think, a decision, and I think there's a difference between a broken process and a difference of opinion that the commission decided. The commission as a whole voted, and I was in the minority, and I accept that. I disagree with the ultimate decision, but I definitely respect that the majority at the time made not the right call, sorry, made a decision that I, as the dissenting vote, have respected. And so for me, I did explain why I felt it was important that, the petition for rehearing should have gone forward and not just accepted it under the legal ramifications. It comes to, for me now, when we're looking at the adoption of the settlement agreement, what do I do with whether or not I approve the settlement agreement when I feel that the threshold issues were wrongly decided, and when I feel that the underlying matters were inappropriate and were improper. For me, the distinction is that we go back to, in many ways, in this order, the revocation order is mooted, the compliance order is mooted. I'm looking at you to make sure I'm saying the right words. I don't want to have a disagreement with you, so. Okay. So that what stands is really a modification, in essence, of the merger, which I initially approved. That's a nuanced answer, but it really is technically what we're dealing with. However, the order itself is through a very tortured process. So it's a very difficult process for me that I wouldn't have been able to get to, but for the fact that I do feel very strongly that we have a chair who has publicly acknowledged the concern for having, has regret for having had the special session without me. And I thank you for that. And also we have, we're blessed with a new commissioner who I think brings an enormous amount of value to the table. And also, she herself, all of that side stuff is not for her. She was not here for any of that. So she herself will not have to, cannot really contend with the review of that. She herself is really all just looking at the settlement agreement itself and whether that is appropriate or not. Because the noise of all of that before is really something that she can't wade through in a way that would make sense, except to the extent of going forward, the process must be different because we all have a voice that needs to be recognized. And I think that that's a powerful one. So to the extent that that, I think, is really the message that for today is that I think we can all embrace. When I look at the settlement, I do just want to pick out a few things that speaks to me in terms of one of the comments that were made was on Stop the Cap, requesting that the commission study the impact of the charter strike and encouraging charter to settle the strike at the earliest opportunity. My concern with that is the order does not make it affirmatively clear that we do not, nor shall we ever use the commission to leverage position for the union or management in their labor management negotiations. We don't. We should not. And to the extent that that has been some of the concern by folks that has been done, I think that this should be very clear. It is not within our jurisdiction, and it has a chilling effect to do so. And I just want to make sure that we understand that we are not involved in, we do not get involved in labor disputes. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think it's fair to say. I do think that there are consequences during a labor dispute that has impacts on, or potential impacts on, areas under the Commission's authority that can be impacted, service quality being one of them. So I think that we still have a responsibility to make sure that when there is a labor concern, and this has happened several times during Verizon's labor issues, we do ensure that service quality standards are not affected by that. So there are issues that we need to be very careful, not to ignore.
Right. But to the extent that it is not seen as wading into any labor dispute or being used as bullying tactics on either end, we have to be very clear. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's correct, Commissioner.
Okay. The other question I have is, the order speaks to that charter will be required to make a one-time deposit of $6 million into a fund to be identified by DPS staff or the commission and dedicated to financing incremental broadband expansion projects selected by the BPO. Can you explain to me what makes the distinction between DPS staff or the commission?
Yeah, I'll try to answer. Just to clarify, there's two separate $6 million funds.
Yep.
One is, and I want to make sure I'm in the right section of the settlement agreement, so please indulge me for a second. So there is the incremental broadband fund that would require Charter to make a deposit of $6 million into a fund to be identified by the department and the commission and dedicated to the construction of additional broadband passings. There is also the incremental build commitment, which requires Charter to make a one-time deposit of $6 million into a fund to be identified by the Department and Commission. So, just for absolute clarification, the two $6 million funds would be treated in a similar manner with regard to how it's identified by the Department and the Commission. I think the intent of having that oversight by the Department and the Commission is to ensure the flexibility necessary to allow the company to establish a fund that we feel is establish an account that we feel is appropriate, and to hold them to some accountability going forward once department staff or the commission is comfortable that that is the appropriate mechanism to receive those funds.
Right. I guess I'm trying to figure out who decides between, do you decide? Do I decide? Who decides, DPS staff or the commission?
I think at this point, the staff would do this in consultation with the commission in the first instance.
What does consultation with the commission mean? It's because I've seen consultation with the commission not be very robust at times.
Well, we need to give further thought to that. I hadn't given it consideration right now because there were many other things that were going on during the settlement. So we could certainly consider that and get back to you with regard to what we think options are available.
I guess my concern is it's in the order, so it's our order, so I'm a little concerned. I would just strike DPS staff and just leave it at commission.
Well, it's in the settlement agreement.
But
in the section of the order, it was simply a summary of the settlement agreement.
But the order can always modify a settlement agreement, and we have done that.
And this provision really is to ensure accountability, just that there's a way to track the account. It is, I would suggest, a very modest check that I believe staff is capable of doing. I'm not anticipating today that there would be an issue with it, and I believe it would be appropriate for staff. I mean, this is really a tracking to follow through to make sure that it is accounted for. I look at it as a oversight, financing, accountability, auditability aspect.
So I guess I'll give you my perspective. anyone who's ever listened to me at any session knows that anytime it says staff and not the commission, I have always flagged it. Anyone that ever has listened to me at any time in an order where it says staff or commission knows that I will always question. This is a question I raised. This is a question that I am very comfortable with. And for me, the answer of we didn't really think about it is not sufficient. And I'm not really sure the hesitation on figuring out on why it is inappropriate to have it as the commission being involved in it in a way that takes it away from staff. And my concern is that part of the issue is that I want to look at this from the perspective of the transparency of it and the involvement of the commission itself, because part of when we look at this and some of the concerns that have been raised is what is the commission involved in or not. And I want to make sure that my voice is one that's involved, that my involvement is impactful from a substantive perspective, and that when I look at it, it's also about going forward, which gets to the larger issue of I don't want to see that we go backwards rather than forwards. So right now, you have had some success in coming together. If tomorrow things go haywire, are we going to look at now being presented with another revocation order and another compliance order draft before us? How do we prevent that next step? So those are the things that I guess I'm trying to look at.
May I propose? I think this is, John has been pointing out that this is a narrow, almost administrative matter. Maybe I could merely describe it as identifying an escrow account.
That's correct.
We agree that the staff will identify the escrow account and then bring it back to the commission for approval.
Right.
We will do that.
So you'd have to change the order language.
No, I mean we can. The settlement agreement says by the department of the commission, so the department will bring it back to the commission. I think
the
it.
language as is permits this solution, and I will stand by that commitment if you like.
Okay.
Thank you.
So then thank you. So then my next question is on right before the discussion section, there's a reference to PSL section 12 and cites to the duty of counsel to the commission, subject to the direction of the chairman to represent and appear for the people of the state and the commission in all actions and proceedings involving any question under this chapter or within the jurisdiction of the commission, and if directed to do so, to intervene if possible in any action or proceeding in which any question is involved, to commence and prosecute all actions and proceedings directed or authorized. So this is our standard PSL section 12 section. And then there's a footnote 39, which talks about the legal support for the proposition that any agency may reconsider, rehear a decision on its initiative. And it says that the Court of Appeals expressly held an agency may reconsider and alter a prior determination when there's a change in circumstances. So I think what you're trying to do is to say that's the proposition that you can utilize to moot your revocation order and compliance order and change your position going forward. And then the section 12 is the boilerplate language so that if there's an issue with the settlement agreement, you can go to court. Is that correct?
Yes, in part. There are two issues here, and I think you've identified them. The footnote 39 really goes to the preceding paragraph, and the Section 12 reference anticipates the process by which the ongoing litigation will be resolved, consistent with the settlement agreement, and that's what this order is setting up. So, if this order is approved and the parties move forward, there is a process by which Charter and the Commission, through its counsel, will address and resolve the litigation matters, the two litigation matters, which are pending before Albany County Supreme Court.
Right. But then you use the 2009 settlement agreement as changed circumstances for the proposition that changed circumstances of the subject, it results in being able to get rid of the commission actions taken as a result of the disputes.
Yes, that's a separate issue. The 2019 settlement agreement, yes.
Right. Okay. So I guess for me, I did take a little pause from that because that gets back to, again, underlying orders that I did not agree with. And so to the extent that the order itself is one that the language is, for me, and referencing all of that those are all voided because of the process issues versus the change in circumstances, so that the settlement agreement goes to based on the merger and actions from that. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I
It's not clean.
was able to follow that precisely. If I could take
It's muddled.
I'm not sure that I understood exactly.
Right. No, I'm just saying it's
point,
because the process is muddled. It's a muddled process to try to get through because the order itself has many different actions that are sort of kind of moving and changing based on now the settlement agreement.
Well, I would actually suggest that it is not muddled from our perspective, from staff's perspective. I would suggest that the 2019 settlement order resolves multiple issues in a comprehensive way, holistically going forward, and that as a result of the 2019 settlement agreement, previous orders are moot.
I would add that the orders that preceded revocation and compliance were primarily based on a disagreement on the network build-out.
Mm-hmm.
The 2019 settlement agreement spends a large part of its time resolving that issue, which is the changed circumstance upon which we believe the commission can revisit those orders.
Okay.
And I agree with John that Section 12 is more in line with what we would do with regard to the resolution of the Supreme Court litigation.
That makes sense. And just so we're clear, though, when I talked earlier about the need for fleshing out on the path forward and looking at what it means from a certainty perspective, Section 12, which has been utilized in a generic way, has now been utilized much more frequently in a way that I am not comfortable with, to step outside the bounds of the commission proceedings, to go to court affirmatively against companies, and then to reach settlements outside of the normal PSC proceedings, and then to step back into the commission after the fact, outside of the commission itself being involved. So to the extent that when we're looking at the commission and the full commission being involved, that is something, and I've spoken about this before, but it is something that I just pull up as something that when we look at process, it's important because that establishes in a very real way the certainty and the consistency to those market participants, to the customers, and to stakeholders in what our regulatory structure is and will be, and it gives the commission its jurisdictional boundaries and helps to set what we're doing. So I think we need to keep that in mind, and that's very important to me, especially in making sure that the commission as a whole is involved in those decisions. It's different, in terms of, some ministerial matters, but as to substantive matters, substantive decisions, we need to be very mindful of that. So that's rather than an after the fact. So just be mindful. One of the other things, and then I think I'm through, is that because we did not have a petition for rehearing filed, it was not so much that the petition for rehearing was not filed that was a difficult one, but it left then a vacuum. We had the July session, ironically, almost a year since then. We had a July session which had two orders, the revocation order and the compliance order. And then we had a lot of procedural extension orders, and then we have now the settlement agreement before us. But what we don't have, and what is concerning to me, is we don't have as commissioners anything that showcases what the weakness is, meaning even a confidential legal memo that showcases the weaknesses of our own position. So for me, and you once referenced, going to court and the importance of that and enforcement, that when you go that mode, if you're going to settle, it's important that you understand whether or not, when you're looking at it, if that's a good settlement or not. And part of that is to understand your own litigation risk and weighing it. And I, as a decision maker, feel it's very important that I know myself whether we had a strong case. Now, publicly, the order speaks that, but we never had, and the petition for rehearing would have showcased some of the weaknesses. And so I do feel that my desire, which I have spoken about, for that memo from counsel should have come to me. And that is something that I would like to see with settlement agreements, whether it's this case or another case, because I think that then gives me the tools as a decision maker on sound decision making when I'm deciding the weight of the settlement agreement as well as weighing the public interest, because it is, I think, an important component.
I think that I'm going to just address the first part of your question and then turn it over to John. But the company, for its reasons, decided not to pursue the rehearing and ask for the extensions. I can't, I'm not going to sit here and speak for their actions and why they decided to do that. But we did, and we have been consistent in our presentations to the commission during the times of the extension that we had every intention of making sure that SAPAs were going to be issued, and in this case, secretary's notices were issued as well, so the settlement agreement could be reviewed under that lens as well. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, it's not about whether the company. It's about, I think, something that should be as part and parcel of from counsel's office.
Well, I'd like to speak to that, if I may, and I'd like to talk about the public interest. I'd like to talk about efficiency, and I'd like to talk about, in my view, the bottom line. And the settlement agreement, from our perspective, from the Office of Counsel's perspective, is in the public interest. I think because, among other things, it provides for build-out. It provides for build-out that will take place in upstate New York. And it provides for build-out to occur on a prompt and enforceable timeline. And these considerations, plus the funding commitments that we've already discussed, clearly weigh in favor and materially advance the public interest of New Yorkers. As to efficiency, the settlement does resolve outstanding litigation matters, and it does so without the time, the expense, and the delay that could be associated with protracted litigation. So we're much further along in terms of a benefit, a public benefit, and we're much further along in terms of time. And that actually allows department staff, it frees up department staff, to pursue other initiatives and other reviews, and it provides certainty. So the bottom line from the litigation context that you're speaking of is that with the 2019 settlement agreement and with today's order, from my perspective, the public interest in New Yorkers are in a materially better place today than where things stood a year ago, and we have presented an option here that provides certainty and provides it in a timely manner. So, from a public interest perspective, from a reasonable perspective, this is clearly in favor of the public interest.
I think thank you, because the public interest piece is valid, and I appreciate that. The irony of it all is that if I was at the special session before looking at the revocation order and the compliance order, I would have asked you for the pros and cons on the merits of the case, and therefore the weakness of whether or not it was a good order or not, and whether it was strong or not, would have been some of those very issues. So for me, that gets to some of the heart of the very issues that I'm now asking for, that still are not forthcoming. That is something that I think is important from a litigation risk perspective, and looking at it, I think it's part and parcel of any settlement agreement. Internally, I think it's something that I think most prudent legal decision makers would ask for, and would add value to any decision, especially when it's and would help. I accept that for whatever reason that's not going to be forthcoming on decisions, but it is something that I think would be well worth the value of going through. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Lisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. this was not an easy process arriving here, and I think those who might remember the months leading up to this that I wasn't dragged kicking and screaming, but I wasn't happy that we were continuing to give our approval to extensions. At one point, I was frustrated enough to suggest maybe we should give a 60-day extension prior to Thanksgiving rather than a 30-day, because we knew that it wasn't going to happen. And sitting here and having to vote yes, it can be kind of frustrating. But I guess to make a long story short, which probably is more my nature, we knew we had to get somewhere with this because it was on our plates. Maybe we didn't like the way it was put on our plates, but the fact is that there was a call to duty, and when you answer the call to duty, you don't necessarily have to try to figure out how and why the call to duty came about, because the object is to serve the public interest, first and foremost. And part of serving the public interest is to look into everything that is presented to you, weigh it, measure it, and act on it. And we acted on it several times. Once again, maybe not the most pleasant thing to do. In fact, I believe at one of the sessions I said, I don't want to do this again. It's probably on the record. I'm probably the only one that remembers it. But to make a long story short, once again, I always knew that I was going to be the swing vote. And up until the time we have a fifth member, it's possible that, that could be the case for any one of us here. But on this particular issue, it was an additional responsibility, not a burden. I don't think anything we do here as far as voting has to be a burden. At the end of the day, we vote the way we want to vote. I have no regrets about voting on this issue. I always put my confidence, even though I questioned it, reasonably so, my confidence in the department and in the leadership, and I will do today as I did all along. I will vote yes on this issue.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards.
I just have a question about the comments that you and the back and forth with Commissioner Berman. It's unfortunate that some of the comments we would not be able to address, especially when the employees are concerned in the negotiation. And while we can't weigh in on the specifics of the negotiation on either side, we can encourage some sort of settlement, because if they're not settled, we can't get this done. Right? So I do think that we have some sort of responsibility to say we encourage continued discussions, or am I wrong there? Because how are we going to enforce this order to complete this build out if they're not together? So I just want to be.
Are you talking about the labor discussions?
Yes.
I see.
Yeah. So while we can't weigh in on one side or the other, it's to our advantage that they come to some sort of resolution. Otherwise, how are we going to be able to get this done and hold them to the timelines?
So I would suggest that the issue that's before the commissioners today is this 2019 settlement agreement and the proposed order, which concerns the network build out
Right.
in upstate New York.
Understood.
And
No, I understand. I just wanted to make sure that I just didn't understand the communication between you and Commissioner Berman as it relates to whether we're weighing in on any type of labor negotiation settlement. We can't do that. But
Right. This order and today's process does not concern, does not involve that.
it's not addressed one way or the other. It's just that the comments that came in related to that.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. All right, fine. Okay. The only comment that I have, and this is for after this, is would we be able to get the exception process given to us? Because if there are certain number of addresses that have to be provided, there is an exception process of substitution of addresses. It's not just because it's specific addresses that have to be put in. But behind that, there's always well, we thought we were going to be able to do this address, but we can't, and then there's a substitution. So I just would be interested going forward, not for today, but for going forward, is understanding what that exception process is, because I think that that's very important.
Yes, and we will be happy to brief you on that point, but I will generally point out that the settlement agreement does contain several areas where staff will be validating addresses, auditing, so we will be looking at those.
But it's the substitution piece of it. So that, we just want to make sure that it's going in the places where the intent of this order is, and not just being heavily skewed one way or the other based on exceptions.
So backing up a little bit, the settlement agreement, one of the other areas that the settlement agreement attempts to resolve is to ensure that we don't have that problem on a large scale going forward, because we've identified so many eligible addresses or not eligible addresses, as the case may be, in the first instance.
Okay.
Maybe I'll turn it over to Debbie for
I think,
a little more clarification.
I think, Brian,
or
perhaps
we can do it on a.
I think the main point is your commitment to Reef,
Right.
the commissioner.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That's all for me.
Commissioners, plural. Thank you.
So I just want to understand what the process is then with the next steps for engagement with the commissioners.
So I think we committed to coming back to you. The first thing would be coming back to you with where the escrow would be placed. We'll work with the company and come to a decision, and we'll bring that to you for your approval.
Right. And I just want to comment, I think that Commissioner Edwards' question was not really fully answered. It doesn't have to be answered here. I think she really was legitimately trying to find out and understand, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, what the appropriate boundaries were as it dealt with labor, because I raised the issue of the labor disputes. Obviously, there's a lot of concern around that. One of the commenters raised that issue. We did not affirmatively address it in the order. And so it leaves some concern, especially because there's been a feeling that, or by some, that we are involving ourselves. So we need to be very careful that as to labor disputes, we do not get involved in those and what our boundaries are. So while it may not be this item, we do need to be careful that there's not an appearance that we are inappropriately engaged in activities that seem to be done to direct certain outcomes, whether for the benefit of management or for the benefit of labor. And to the extent that we are working towards doing things that are helpful overall, like when we have obviously looking at different things through whether or not there's certain I mean, in other avenues, we get involved in looking at whether there's enough workforce development in other avenues. I just want to be very careful that we are appropriately addressing these issues outside of this forum, because I think it's important, and we're mindful of that. I also want to be mindful of that as to the next steps for how we engage, or how staff engages with commissioners on enforcement actions and going forward in settlements, that's, or if there's disruption or disputes, that before it gets out of hand, that we are engaged in that way, because I don't want it to be now we're back to a situation. I know that previously there had been requests for an ALJ to be assigned. That may be something that we look at. So that's all.
I'm good.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I think we're ready at this point to call for a vote, and I'll proceed to vote myself. My vote is in favor of the recommendations to adopt the 2019 settlement agreement and reconsider other related actions as discussed. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I'm not going to be voting for this item because the order itself is tied too much to the underlying orders that are problems for me, and the ends don't justify the means. While I do support the overall underlying merger, and I am happy that we have moved beyond what I think was a problem with a revocation order and a compliance. I can't, in good conscience, vote for something that I think was a problem process that would only encourage continued justification. However, I am comfortable with the path forward, and I do think that we've had a good dialogue in what needs to be for future engagement on that. So this is not a voting no, meaning that I support a revocation order and compliance. It's a vote no to the actions that were taken predating this. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lisi?
Vote yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
I think that the upstate folks need to have their broadband as quickly as possible, especially in the low-income areas. So if this is going to get us there, I'm all in, so I'll vote in favor.
Thank you very much. The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. Recommendations are adopted, excuse me. We will now move to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any items on the consent agenda? Commissioner Berman?
Just give me a minute, sorry. For item 261, I'm voting in favor of the tariff amendments filed by Orange and Rockland Utilities that make permanent the rates and provisions for rate year 1. Notwithstanding that I concurred in the underlying order that approved the company's rates, I am voting in favor of this item because the tariffs that set forth are consistent with this order. I am voting in 373. I am abstaining from voting on this item. It does, while I am supportive that it votes to grant in part the petition for rehearing, it does change the program dynamics, and I do think that that changes a policy direction, and I think that we should be awaiting the full commission as well as looking at what this means in light of all the EV and the white paper that is soon to come out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Lisi?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Under item 165A, case number 19-0423, I would like to recuse myself from voting.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Edwards?
On item 167, I just want to point out that I'm glad to see that we're doing more in terms of performance and holding people accountable for training and compliance, because as it relates to 165, there's 20 alleged violations, and 165B, there's 11 more. I want to make sure that we're doing, and it looks like we're doing whatever we can to ensure that the companies are not using the fine as a cost of doing business, that they're taking it seriously, that they need to be compliant with the safety protocols and the training and everything that they need to do to keep people safe. It's very important. So I am glad to see that we're taking this step, and I look forward to seeing if we could do even more to ensure that they are compliant with the safety aspects of excavation and also how they are putting together the piping and so forth.
So, Commissioner, just to clarify, you're drawing favorable attention to these items.
Absolutely.
And they will be a yes in
It's
your
a yes.
consent vote.
It's a good thing.
Are you good, Secretary?
I think you just need to call for the vote.
I know, but that's clear enough?
Yes,
Okay,
thank
terrific.
you. Thank you.
So with those remarks and recusals, et cetera, I call for a vote on the consent agenda. My own vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Berman? As modified. Commissioner Lisi?
Yes, as noted.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
In favor, yes.
The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Dare I ask, Secretary Burgess? Is
There's
there
nothing
anything
f-
further
no-
to come before us today?
Nothing further for today.
Thank you very much. Thank you all, colleagues.